Okay, so we're just going to wait for a couple things to come online real
Okay.
quick. And I think if I just take a quick refresher here, we might be live.
Nope, says offline.
Yes,
for
it
now.
does,
Just
but-
give it a second.
We will get up there.
Delays a little bit. Or...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there we are. Okay. Okay, I think we're live. Beautiful. Thank you, Joseph, for being here on episode number 2. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see this very impressive
Oh,
little
yeah.
home studio setup
home
you
studio.
have there.
What do you think? What do you think about it?
It's pretty serious. I'm trying to do my own podcast sometime this year, and I won't be attempting this level of.
You are more than welcome to
production.
come and use the studio anytime you like.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So feel free to come and take advantage of this, man. It's here 7 days a week. Do you like to be called Joe or Joseph?
Joseph. I guess my dad was Joe. So growing up, it was always Joe and then Joseph.
Awesome. I love the
distinguish.
Superman shirt. As you can
Yeah,
see, we
that's
represent Superman in this house
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
well.
Yeah, I see it
So,
over there.
Yeah. Awesome, man. And so Joseph is, I don't really want to do too much of an introduction. I kind of want it to just unfold. But, Joseph is CEO of a biotech startup in San Diego. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, Carlsbad, North County, San Diego.
All right. And we met just a week ago at the longevity meetup here in San Diego, La Jolla, right by University of San Diego.
Yeah, down at the Sanford Burnham
So tell me,
Institute.
what got you into this whole longevity thing?
So,
Why do you want to live in this miserable world for so long?
well, that's a whole other kind of debate,
Philosophical.
right?
Sure.
Personally, I think, we want the option to live indefinitely. And if you're not satisfied, you can always end yourself, always kill yourself if you decide you're too old and miserable.
For sure.
And of course, to clarify, a lot of people get confused by this. The idea is not to be 90 years old and perpetually feel like an ancient 90-year-old who's miserable and joints hurt. You're going to be indefinitely in a youthful state. So hopefully in your prime for an indefinite amount of time. There's an old classic book and movie called Logan's Run, where the people were essentially all programmed to, die at age 30. Then it turns out they weren't. It was optional. It was called Logan's Run because he tries to run. He tries to flee the society.
Gotcha.
So, there's all kinds of interesting science fiction scenarios. This is also in Blade Runner. If you saw the remake recently, well, the original Blade Runner, right? They programmed these replicants to only live like 4 years. Or
Have you seen the movie In Time?
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite movies.
It was okay. That was a while back. I think Justin Timberlake.
Yeah,
was in
well,
that.
I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
you can tell,
I
but I
see
got
you
a
got
Justin
a
Timberlake
thing
shirt
on there.
on.
You're a big
Actually,
fan.
wasn't even planning to talk about Timberlake today, but you brought up
Right.
all the science fiction time stuff, so I thought
Right.
about that movie.
So there's these different distinct issues. Yes, the state of the world is not necessarily great, but you're kind of assuming all of these things are going to stay constant. It's like you're not going to feel like a burned out, 90-year-old. If we do this right and we get it right, and then you're going to be like in the prime of your life, you'll be youthful and enthusiastic, just like you were when you were still in your early 20s. And you look what happens to people when they age. They hit middle age and everything starts to decline.
Yeah.
Your motivation, and by the time you start getting up in your 60s and 70s, everything dwindles. And the studies they've done of people, it shows that you live in the past and just keep like repeating things. This is really true of my dad, for example, because he was in the military and then he was a doctor for many years, and all he ever thinks about is his former military days. That was the most meaningful time in his life. Right, because he served.
What about today? What about the present?
Yeah, and your brain is actually aging such a point where it cannot form new connections and new. Your neuroplasticity has diminished.
Yeah.
So, this even happens, unfortunately, like after your teenage years. It's really declining even in your 20s. That's why language acquisition drops off after like 14. And then we just get worse and worse. A lot of things, the older we get, and we look at people like Trump. I'm not going to get political on this, right? But it's for any president we've had has always been 60s and up. That's
Sure.
like kind of concerning if we actually realize that by the time you're that age, your brain is not open to new things.
New
that
ideas.
You're like stuck on this. It's like, why do we have a society that is set up where only the people that are older end up with the power? It's ass backwards, actually, right?
it's
We
kinda
have
weird.
this, like, Social Security is completely backwards. It should be that everyone has a stipend when they're young, so you can actually travel the world and do things, be creative and productive. And instead, we've set up this economy where you're going to, quote, save for retirement. And if you're lucky, by the time you're 65 or 70, then you can sit on your ass, but then you don't
And
have
yeah.
any energy, right? And you're not going to do anything creative. And all of your best work, from artists, scientists, it's been pretty much documented that it was done up until their mid and, early 30s, and their productivity period kind of levels off after that. There's some exceptions, okay, with different fields, but I mean, obviously athletics, you've seen it. You have, if you're going to be in the Olympics, you start training at age 6 and you're finished by like age 24 because you've burned out the body is pretty much in it. And that kind of stuff ages you faster too. Depends on the sport.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of stuff you said in there. One thing you mentioned was about neuroplasticity. Now, that was a concept I wasn't familiar with, but I learned about quite like early last 2000. I want to say 2017, actually, late 2017. I was kind of going through my existential crisis, and I was really concerned with a lot of different beliefs that I had and about my life and where it was going. And I kind of fell into a depression, honestly, right? Like that's where things took turn for. And we were talking about this a little bit when I met you. And neuroplasticity, there's a doctor. She's, I think, he's a neurologist or neurophysicist. I don't know. Works in the brain field for sure. And Dr. Caroline Leaf, maybe you know her.
Okay. I don't know her by name, but
And she's a Christian, so she kind of combines science with like her belief in her faith, and that's great. And she has a practice. Basically, it was a 21-day detox, and I did it. All you do, and the science behind it is that you take toxic thoughts and you put them out on paper, and as you're doing them over and over repetitively, you're actually changing the structure of your brain. The dendrites new dendrites are formed when you replace a toxic thought with what you want, out of that. So if there's something really bad, like, I'm terrible at public speaking, then you say like, okay, I'm going to practice talking in front of the mirror 6 times today. And you try to do actionable checks of yourself. I did this for almost a month, man. And almost it just became a writing exercise. I don't know if things actually took place, but I definitely felt better every single day that I did it. And like one day that I skipped it in that 21 day, I really felt like, oh my God, I just out of place. It was super weird, but I felt something was working. So like neuroplasticity as a concept, I feel I've experimented with it in that exercise, and I definitely noticed a change in my behavior and in my thought structure. The things that I was concerned about were no longer bothering me because I had almost reasoned them out. In a way, it was therapy for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, neuroplasticity, I've experienced it in that sense. So that was really cool. And the other thing I was going to talk to you or ask you about from what you just said was the people I think pick presidents or whatever is because they think people get older and they're going to be the most wisest people, right? But that's not necessarily the truth anymore because technology is relatively new and people that are very apt on technology are generally younger.
Right. Well, one thing I point out, this is kind of a modern construction. Alexander the Great conquered the known world. He famously, was taking over from his father, King Philip, when he was like 14 years old.
I don't know the story.
So Alexander the Great is kind of he was the first sort of global empire.
Oh, okay.
Conquered Greece, conquered, so his father's Philip of Macedonia. So he was, there's a bunch of biography pictures that have been done of him. Yeah, Alexander the Great.
This cat right here.
Right. So you pull him up. So, but this is actually kind of common in history that, used to be, because all of our constructs around adolescence and stuff is sort of like invented in the last 150 years. You used to be considered essentially an adult when you're like 12 or 14.
Isn't that crazy? People got married around that time.
Right. Well, we did. Yeah, but the point was that young people had leadership capacity.
Isn't it also because people didn't live that long?
That's partly it. Yeah. Too. You died when you're 40.
Yeah.
So you had to stop
Life
wasting
expectancy
time.
was much lower.
Yeah, but it's more about, speaks to the fact that, but even 100 years ago in the early days of industrialization, right, when you had J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, all of these characters they became called like the robber barons, right? But they were sort of self-made men. It really is about the fact that there weren't these barriers to entry, and the credentialing system that we have in the last pretty much since World War II, so the last 80 years.
I didn't know what a robber baron was.
Yeah, it's just think of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and stuff today.
Self-made.
They're the equivalent of the industrial oligarchs, now. We've had this is sort of a, capitalism tends to be a winner-take-all thing
Right.
that rewards these kinds of industrial hustlers and tycoons who can, become the first in an industry. And a lot of times they were making their money in oil, steel, and the railroads in the 1800s. And
This is around the same time Nikola Tesla was around, right?
yeah, Tesla was a contemporary at that
I know
time.
he went to J.P. Morgan
and Edison, right?
to get money for his
Edison
inventions.
sort of screwed him on everything
Yeah,
and
that
got
guy's an
those
asshole.
industrialists pretty much. Yeah.
But also gave us like a lot of good stuff. So it's kind of
Well, yeah, I mean, this is always history is kind of written by the victors and then
Yeah.
reinterpreted. But the point we're making
I
there
like that.
was just that, like, Alexander the Great was the ruler of the known globe, marched into Egypt. He did all this like before age 30, and then he died from some like poison arrow or something, poison dagger. Or maybe it was appendicitis or something, right? Because
terrible way to
anything
go.
could take you out back then in the ancient days, right? We
Right.
didn't have modern medicine. So it's very much arbitrary that we came up with this thing that says now you have to go to high school, then you have to go to college, then you have to go master's degree, and you need a PhD. None of that is how things have been in history. It's pretty much gatekeepers end up entrenched in whatever field. You've probably seen it in computer science. There was no computer science 60 years ago. It was just electrical engineering was the only
Right.
degree at MIT that they had. Bodybuilding, same thing has happened. There used to be no such training certificates.
Fair
You want to be a
enough.
personal trainer, you just started training people. Now you have 1,000 different competing credential systems, and you can't, even get in to work as a personal trainer
bidding war.
unless you do the NASC, whatever certifications. This is what happens in any field over time. Established people will create barriers. That's also what happens in immigration. In the United States, it's completely a nation entirely of immigrants, and now we've turned around and refused to allow reasonable immigration for other people that want to come to this country. Right? It's just completely insane. So that's, I'm pretty much against all forms of rules and regulation wherever possible. I'm an anarchist.
You're an anarchist? Damn.
Which is a particular, this doesn't mean chaos and disorder, but it's a theory of organization that says that people can self-organize their own systems without coercion and violence.
Where does this come from, Joe? Where did this all start? Why are you like this?
Well, I guess, it goes back to growing up. And
Where did you grow up?
I was mostly in South Carolina. So
Oh, okay, cool. I've only been to their airport.
It's not that exciting. Charleston is like the best
Yeah,
city.
I think
in
that was
South
the airport
Carolina
I
to
was in.
visit.
Charlotte. Charlotte?
Charlotte is North Carolina. It's one of the
Okay.
major hubs.
My bad.
But yeah, no, so my
I don't
family,
go that way very often.
There's not a whole lot now in
Yeah,
the southeast that's
sure.
necessarily worth.
It's beautiful.
seeing.
A lot of greenery, though.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few nice things. It's very
cold.
scenic. This is from the original 13 colonies, right?
For sure.
We had
Oh, yeah.
Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia. We were kind of the original founding colonies of the United States. Also had slavery, not a good thing. And after the Civil War, it never really recovered. So you have this long history of stuff from 1865, and still to this day we have racial problems and unrest. We have economically, technologically. It's just very different because I've lived all over now. I live, of course, in the Northeast. We'll get to that in a minute. I finally moved to California in 2009. I lived in Australia, London, Brazil
Before
for a while.
all of this.
After school, after college. I moved around a lot.
So what year were you in school?
2000 to 2004.
And for the audience, if you don't know, Joe went to Harvard, and we're gonna definitely talk about Harvard because I want to know.
Yeah, we can get
'cause
into that.
I'm not smart enough to go there, and I want to know what it's really like. But anyway,
Sure.
so you moved around a whole bunch. Why were you moving around a whole bunch, by the way?
Well, that was after I finished school. I decided to get out and travel. I wanted to get out of the United States for a while because I was so frustrated and burned out on
what made
certain
you so
things.
frustrated?
just having come through, done all the things I thought I was supposed to do for
Like go to this good school.
22 years, come out with this degree thing, and then it's like, you know, and I felt like it was all a scam, which essentially it was. And then
I kind of knew that going into
yeah,
it.
as soon as I saw this, then of course what happens, we have the 2008 meltdown, the financial recession crisis, which was
Yeah,
just,
that's right.
we've just pushed that off. So now we're getting ready to come and have the round two.
That's what we
to
talked
have
with
the
Brad
final
about.
reckoning of that.
Yep.
But yeah, by the time I got out of school, I was just like, well, this, you know, is exactly what I thought, that most of the things I've been
You weren't
told
fulfilled for sure.
are a scam, that you've got to go do this. There was no option except to go to Wall Street, law school, med school, investment banking. You know, all this is all my classmates did. Right.
Did you
And
look for a job after college?
I ended up going over to do a master's in London for a year, just to, again, sort of to kill time. Right.
Master's
And
in.
it was history and philosophy of science.
What was your undergraduate in?
It was government and basically political science, political theory.
Wow.
So,
cool.
you know, history of political thought.
And that's like,
This is why I
that's
became
not
an
like
anarchist.
just saying that because it's at the best possible place, you know, for information and those subjects. And
Well, I mean, there's a lot, you know, honestly, you just have to read prolifically. There's only certain classics. You know, anyone can be educated. You
Well,
don't
okay,
have to go to some big
If we're
name
getting into
place.
this, I want to go back a little
Sure.
bit. How the hell did you get into Harvard? First off, were you like a really
Right.
good student? Like, what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you realize that our system is a scam, you have to check certain boxes.
Agreed.
So yeah, I mean, I did. I was the valedictorian, had like 5.0 grade point average, perfect
like,
grades.
Getting good grades.
Did
was
all
not-
the stupid you have to do these stupid extracurriculars,
Fair
check
enough.
all these boxes, piano,
Who
martial
got
arts.
you in all this? Because your dad?
I just did it. I decided to apply.
How'd you figure it all out?
Right. I mean, honestly, you know, the reason I did it is because Harvard is one of the only ones that has this like super one-page simple application form.
Are you
It's called the
serious?
Common Application, and it's basically because they get so many
I'm gonna
applicants.
look this shit up. Is this real?
So like Stanford, for example, I was thinking of applying there and I just threw it out because I couldn't stand their essay. They had like 4 little different essay prompts that were all like, tell us about the time that you failed at this and what did you learn from it? And tell us about your first blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, this is just obnoxious, asinine. I don't want to fill out all this touchy-feely little BS thing, so I didn't apply. So basically Harvard uses this simplified thing. It's because they have every perfect score person in the world apply. So
Damn,
it's
you're
like
right.
they
This is
don't-
probably from around your time. It's 2004, 2005.
Yeah, so they don't even care. It's like, you know, but I would tell you, like, it's not what it's cracked up to be. I mean, you have to be realistic about this. I didn't really want to go to college
Why?
because I thought it was a scam. I was like, this sounds like it's like people are telling me I wanted to go and I have all these crazy ideas growing up as a kid, right? And I wanted to go into business and start ventures, right? And it's like, well, everybody says, well, you got to have work experience, but then to have work experience, you have to have a degree. And then it's a catch-22. So it's a paradox because you can't get the experience without the credential. And then to apply for these other degrees, they want to know your experience. So I was like, okay, if this is the way it's going to, I'm going to try to just get the biggest name thing that exists in the world.
Just go to the top.
Get that on there, and then I'll know, you know, because I'm pretty much convinced.
I
it
like
sounded-
that, Joe. I like the way you think. You're like, if I got to do this shit, I'm going to do
I
it
didn't
right. I'm
wanna
going to go
do it at all,
to
right?
the best school possible. I'm going to get the best degree
Well,
because you're like, might
you
as
want
well.
the name, right?
Well, if you're
I'm
gonna
not
do it, do
saying-
it right.
I'm not saying the education is that great.
Fair enough, but
right?
you're like in the system that we're playing in, you're
But
like, I'm going to
however, it kind of backfired, right? Because
How?
when I got in there, and then it's just like you're mentally not prepared for this. Because if you've gone your whole life,
I felt the same way when I went to community college after high school. So, I mean, I feel like
right.
it's the same.
Well, what happens is you're gonna mind fuck yourself. So everybody there psychs
Because
themselves
of
out.
Harvard.
Right. So you get this one thing that's referred to as like imposter syndrome, which is a
I had
well-known
that at my
thing,
first
right?
job. I
which
still
a
do
lot of people can
sometimes.
have that about stuff. I didn't usually suffer from that.
Hmm.
And then I got all mentally fucked up for a while. And then I finally, when I was through there, I was like, fuck the shit. I was right. I know that I'm, you know, I kind of lost myself for a while. And then it took me a very long time to get back and realize, hey, you know, actually I really am more competent than most humans.
Were you working out then?
Yeah, I started training when I was 12. So
Here's one thing that I think is a very
bodybuilding.
important factor in the story. Because like you, I started working out, I think, I want to say 16 or 17, right? I was really small
Right.
in high school. I knew I couldn't really get taller, so wider
Sure.
was a good option.
Right.
You know, a couple of the older kids in high school, that got attention were the ones that were working out, because not
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
was at the
Sure,
time,
of
right? I
course.
went to high school in 2006.
Okay.
So not Instagram wasn't even around
Yeah,
yet, right?
right.
So, FitFam wasn't a thing,
Okay.
right? But like a few people that would work out, I knew that there was something to it, and more than anything, it gave you a discipline,
Right.
right? So when I started to develop that discipline, it gave me an insane amount of confidence because it made me feel like I have control over something, right? Because there's not too much that you control in life. You don't control a lot of the outcomes. You put in your effort. You don't
Right.
necessarily know how it's going to go. But with
That's
bodybuilding,
true, yeah.
it was one of those things where it's like, it's proportional. Like if I work out hard, if I diet, if I stay
Right.
disciplined
You can
day
get
in,
some
day out.
kind of thing out of it. But unfortunately, of course, the judging is completely all over the place.
Apart from the competing
yeah.
part, just the discipline of doing
just
that.
to change the way you look, you can do it. Yeah, I prefer powerlifting in some ways because it's more objective and you can just hit your records and your
For
lifts
sure.
and know what could take that from you. I've done a few bodybuilding shows where the judging was so off that I got, and even this was like one of my third shows or something, and I was like getting so down about it afterwards that for a couple months I couldn't train. It was like it ruined the whole activity for me because the show was so bogus, right? And it's really all about learning the intrinsic versus extrinsic. You cannot do this for any other reason but for yourself.
By the way, I just realized, since we're live, so there's shit's going to go wrong. It still says Bradley's name. This is not Bradley, by the way, guys. This is definitely Joseph Jackson.
Well, you can just change it on the
I'm going to
thing
change
or
it
whatever.
later.
It's fine. Not a big deal.
It's not a big deal. But, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
This is going to happen, man. The first few ones, this is going to happen.
I don't think it's gonna affect people's
Life.
viewing experience.
No, this is raw. This is real. Why we're doing this real, because I want this to be raw.
So yeah, I mean, I guess look, if you want to get in one of these places, I don't know. Like these days, it's just worse and worse. Nobody can get in. The acceptance rates are worse than ever.
Also, you get out of school, getting a job is just as hard as it was to get into school.
Right, that's a whole other thing.
Because you don't have
to learn
experience.
that you basically, if you were there, you need to be networking the whole time, trying to maneuver and line up your next thing. So, and I didn't understand that going in because I'm from South Carolina, right? And a lot of the people I'm going in there with are all from New England. They've been in prep school. They've been coached their whole fucking life for this to go in at Harvard and like dominate. And once I didn't get that. Like I thought when I get in, I'm set. My life is fixed. It's like,
That's
no,
when the race
this was
begins.
like, welcome to the Hunger Games. Fucker, like you got to be ready. Elimination game. You know what I mean? It's like vicious.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I
you
can
get in
imagine.
and I didn't have that. Like I only caught on like after the first year. Well, the whole thing went wrong. So my first entire thing, I was assigned to live with this guy as a roommate, and he was completely nuts. He was cracking up. He had already had like long-standing mental illness before he came. He was OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It manifests in many ways, but people may wash their hands is the classic one, but it may be that you check the door 15 times when you're going in and out of the door to make sure you lock the door. It's compulsive thoughts, and you manifest in a ritual behavior. Some people pluck their hair out and their nails out. So it was a bunch of stuff. It definitely the door. He was doing the door thing, but his behavior, I knew really
like freshman
early
year we're
on.
talking?
Yeah, because I was assigned to live with him. I knew from the moment we talked on the phone, because they give you each other's number before you get up there to talk. I was like, this guy's a little odd. This doesn't sound right, because he's like going on and on all these grandiose things about how he plays these instruments. He wrote this play and he did all these things. I'm like, yeah, well, I know we're at Harvard, so there's all these people that are going to be multidisciplinary, whatever, Renaissance man. But the guy just seemed off because he was going on and on about himself in a very grandiose way. I knew I was in trouble when we moved in. His parents came in. He hung a picture of Einstein on the wall that he had drawn, a hand-drawn Einstein thing.
Was it good?
It was okay. I mean, I'm not an artist. So I can't do it. I asked other people later how it was, and they said, yeah, it's all right. It's like mediocre. But he was like, he literally started proclaiming he was going to become the next Einstein. He was going to major in astrophysics and all this. I was like, okay, not very humble.
So not necessarily.
Right?
Wow. Okay.
But so we get into like about 6 weeks into the semester, and I'm like, he just kept getting weirder and weirder. And sure enough, like, we got to the midterms day, and then people came back. They're like, "What happened to your roommate, man? I heard he like ran up to the front of the like classroom and collapsed or something in the midterms."
Oh.
And so he was hospitalized for like anxiety panic attack,
Oh,
and
shit.
for a few days. So he comes out, and then like basically his mom is having to come in. They lived in New York, so she was up there for several weeks. She's like administering certain quiet time, making sure he's taking these medications to tranquilize him. And I'm just getting weirded out because like this is my first time living away from home. I had this roommate. So finally, I moved into our smaller room. We had a 2-room kind of suite with like a common room and then a little area for the bedroom. So I was like, I'll take this small room and just let it be my bedroom so I could get, some space from him. But it just kept degenerating and went worse and worse the way the semester dragged on.
Right.
He went back in, and then finally in the spring, I come back. I'm just like, all of my grades were getting affected. My study was thrown off. Everything was off because I'm so like stressed out with this weird situation being around this guy. And I finally come back one day and heard that the people in my hallway are like, what's going on with your guy? And he was escorted out by university police. He was down on the second floor causing some disturbance.
This is after he came from the hospital?
This was after like 2 hospitalization episodes.
Good Lord.
And holidays.
You were still with him. You couldn't get reassigned
stuck it
or
out.
anything.
I was trying to fight. So this is the thing. Harvard doesn't give a shit. They like will stonewall you.
Harvard, if you're listening.
They don't care. That's what I'm telling you. They have a $40 billion endowment. They have more money than whatever. So basically, that was it for me. It was the last straw. I went and confronted our freshman dean. I left a note on his door. It was on a weekend when I came back on a Friday when this had happened. And I was like, please call me, whatever. I need to have some answer, like what's going on with this. I can't keep living around this guy. So, and then I went to my resident advisor, who was like a clueless 23-year-old. She just graduated herself and was spending a year on the dorm because she's trying to prep for med school. Okay. So she needed to pad her resume. All right, so the dean guy did not like this at all, that I bothered him on a weekend. So he kind of like finally calls me in.
What, did you send him an email?
I taped a note to his door, like on the weekend thing, because I needed, a response. And so we go in for this meeting, and I'm like, look, I've been covering for this guy for 7 months, trying to pretend I don't know about his medical issues. Like, I don't want to know about his medical stuff. I don't like the fact that he's leaving prescriptions out. Now I see all of his drugs that he's on. Like, this is like, should be confidential information. And now I'm seeing it. And I'm like, I'm covering for people asking stuff on the hall. Like,
you're just trying to be
a
genuine human being.
I was like,
stuff.
This was not a good thing. Like, I was assigned to live with this person that you guys knew had a long-standing, for many years, all through high school and everything, existing mental illness. You have $40 billion of fucking endowment. It's like, you guys could have assigned him to be in a private room. They have single rooms. I was like, so you knowingly, can put me in with someone that has a serious thing. And it's obvious that when you're a first year at a stressful thing, your strategies won't work. You're going to have trouble coping. So probably he was going to go off the rails. And so I basically said, look, I need to know what's the plan, what's going on. I can't, if he comes back again, because he went home for however many weeks, I need to know. I'm not comfortable staying around it or whatever. And this dean guy just like basically attacked me, made me feel like I was doing everything wrong. No, mentally. He says he's like,
damn, did you get him on?
And I was like, I said basically, he's not a physically, he was this dweeby little guy.
Are you sure? Because you're a bodybuilder looking like 22, 21? No, you were 18 or 19,
I was like
right?
18, yeah.
And you were like a yoked 18-year-old and you're walking into
exactly. So I tried to be as mature as I could about this. I said, listen, my parents, they're freaked out. They don't know what's going on. They want some kind of answer because they're paying all this money here to this ridiculously expensive place. And he's like, no, we don't have to speak to your parents at all. You're 18. You're considered, not a minor, blah, blah, blah. We have no obligation to do anything. And I was like, wait a minute. You didn't understand anything of what I just said. Doesn't matter what you think you're obligated to do. It's courtesy, politeness, damage control, the fact that this has happened. You owe my parents a phone call, to assuage their valid concerns about this thing that's going on here.
You're a smart young kid.
So he completely trashed me.
Flipped out.
Basically, the guy made me feel like, you're shit. You don't matter to us. We don't care at Harvard. We don't give a fuck. It's your problem, your fault for reacting this way. So I went back and just did nothing. He was like, write up a position statement for me, and then I'll bring it up for review before our next committee meeting with the deans of freshmen thing. So I didn't do anything. I was like, well, this seems like he's trying to like get me to write stuff up in writing so he could entrap me or have some record. So I did nothing. So what I finally did, I just called my roommate. at home. He was back in New York recuperating. And he just told me he was not coming back. He was withdrawing for the rest of the year. But this was already like end of February, March. So we'd lost most of the whole year. And the dean sat on that for a couple weeks. So the decision had already been made that the guy was already withdrawing. And the dean guy didn't even bother getting back to me. Finally, a few weeks later, he emails us like, has decided to withdraw. And I was like, well, great. I didn't say anything. I was like, well, I already knew that because I just called him up and communicated. You know, wasn't this hard. Didn't have to be this hard. You just communicate. We don't have to be ashamed of mental illness and covering up stigma. But I learned is like Harvard has done this. They've had murder, suicides, and stuff where one of the roommates stabbed. In this case, it happened like 10 years before me or 6 years before, where a girl had stabbed her roommate to death with scissors. And Harvard just like covers it up. They paid off the family, and they have a ubiquitous.
Is this online? You think?
Yeah, you can find the case. So they have this like huge mental health crisis on campus where people are just horribly depressed, because everybody there was like a superstar growing up and is extremely competitive, perfectionist, which is what I was my whole life, right?
Dude, this is it, 1995.
Yeah, so that had happened 5 years before I get there. I'm there in 2000, right?
God.
And I'm like, so you guys don't think to have any new policy?
Hold on, Joe. You knew about this?
I didn't know until I looked stuff up later after my experience dealing with the guy, right?
Got it.
So then it gets worse, right? So like a few years later, I read that this dean, I came across an article in the Boston Globe. And there's a blind girl that Harvard has taken. They do this a lot. They'll have kind of students with special needs and stuff. Mm-hmm. So she had a brain tumor that had pushed on her optical nerve and caused her to be completely blind.
Right.
She gets into Harvard, starts her first year. She's like failing math by her first midterms semester.
I was failing math
right.
my first semester of calculus.
Well, that's because she has no way to like get the notes. She needs a special tutor. You know,
I had a terrible teacher too.
So like basically she ends up in front of the same dean that I dealt with, this Mancall guy, was his name's dean of freshmen. And I read the whole article in the Boston Globe about how rude and awful he was at the way he treated her. He basically threatened her too and said, it's your responsibility. If you're here, you've got to, meet
to somebody with special needs.
Yeah, and so she finally got a good classmate who was in her thing that became her like assigned, helped her as her assistant thing, and she managed to pull out a grade and pass or whatever. But I remember reading about this. This was after I'd left, so it was 2005, and I'd already graduated in 2004, and I was living in Australia at the time, and I saw this article come up. I was like, wow, this is the same prick dean. He's still in that position of power, and now he's like beating up on a blind girl. It made me sick. I was so angry. So I carried this sort of resentment for many years about this stuff.
So is that where like some of your resentment for authority came in from?
Yeah, that's one of the main things. And then of course I grew up in this family. My dad was military.
An old guy, right?
Yeah, he was only like 30s to 40. He was probably 38. But it's like any pissant bureaucrat, when they get a tiny bit of power over young people,
for sure.
right, they go crazy. Because look what he is in his life. He's nothing but a little administrator dweeb.
Fair enough.
And he deals with 18-year-olds, right? Just think. So I think one of the things I think he was gay. And no, I'm going to say
that was a suppression, you thought?
I think that it's like, when people are mistreated as part of some other group thing,
we don't know.
Take it out on other people. So probably I know that
for sure.
He was probably not in the closet. He's probably openly gay. That's what I mean. But because he'd grown up being discriminated against or something, now as soon as he got a chance to lash out at other people, because I was trying to psychoanalyze this guy. I'm like, what's driving him to be such a shit to people, right? And I'm like, this could be part of it is maybe he's just like got this anger of his own about that.
I mean, because at that time we're still in the early 2000s. You can't really
the 2000s. It was
really
pretty much. Well, you would have been at Harvard. You would have been out. They were super liberal and everything. So it wouldn't have been a thing. That wouldn't have been a factor for him being admitted. A thing. But it would have been when he grew up because he was probably 40s.
Bullied.
So he was growing up in the era where maybe he was bullied a bunch as a kid. I mean, some people are just pricks. That's why they go into this and become administrators in the first place, because they like to get off on having little tiny bits of power.
Yeah, it could be.
But so that was basically the whole thing felt like a disaster because I never got back on track after that first year because you have to pick your roommates for your next years. You have to get assigned to a group. So it threw my socialization and everything off
Right.
that first year. And then the next year I decided I would study obsessively. I got all A's for the one semester there. And then I realized, well, that's just pointless, like, because it doesn't correlate with any, like, I finally realized almost everybody else was like hardly studying. They're just doing the minimum to pass, because it's like really easy to get a B plus and almost impossible to get an A minus or an A. So you have to do all this extra work to get from this thing, or else you can just half-ass it and you'll get kind of
C's
like
get degrees.
right. Well, something like that. Exactly. So
That's what somebody literally told me.
but what I realized is that everyone in there was like spending most of their time strategically networking and positioning themselves for after graduation.
That's what you should do.
And
in
I was
college.
stupidly like reading all these assigned readings. And I felt like no one's actually reading the reading. I mean, you didn't do the reading. I had like stacks of books and I read every fucking page and was annotating. And like, it made no difference for the actual class for passing the thing. So I was like, okay, so this whole thing is just like, you gamify the system. You want to do the minimum. And that was discouraging too, because I like, I'm the type of person that wants to put 100% effort in something, and I'm used to seeing
the result.
Again, effort and result. And then I realized when I got there, it's arbitrary. It depends on your teaching fellow, how well they like you. And these are a bunch of grad students that have to teach you. You don't even get much professors interaction. You barely ever talk to a real professor. It's just a bunch of poor grad students that are required.
That is true, because a lot of the time you can't, like, especially at universities with class numbers being like 300-400 people.
Yeah.
Well, you can never get the professor's attention.
Sure.
You only have to stick with the
and
TAs.
The successful students, I realized some of my classmates, they would go and attach themselves to a big name professor. Basically suck up to them a whole bunch, volunteer for the thing, and they'll get all the recommendation letters. So there were all these things I just had not known, like, what to do. I would have game planned it differently, and then you become like this ruthless.
Do you remember how much
operator.
it used to cost to go there?
At that point, it was only $50,000 a year. Right, and that's
a year.
That's 18 years ago or whatever. Right. See, so that's the thing. It's like it's crazy. So Harvard will say
UCI was like $14,000
right,
a semester.
Right? And Harvard will say stuff like, "Oh, well, many of our students are on some kind of financial support." But what that means is they take a subset of people that are wealthy and have them pay full price, and then a bunch of other people get financial assistance. But you're not like super wealthy; you still have to pay full price, even if you're middle class.
67,000.
Two
baby.
incomes, yeah. So it's gone up every year with inflation, right?
Insane.
But the whole thing is a scam, okay? And this is what I would tell you. But grad school is even worse. It's just the same, and it goes on and on.
That's $270,000 of debt.
Yeah,
in 4 years.
It's nuts, right?
That's like a Lamborghini.
This is why I would not recommend it to anyone. So later on in my career, I became a mentor to this Thiel Foundation 20 Under 20 program.
What's that?
Peter Thiel is the founder of PayPal. So he's this eccentric billionaire.
Didn't you work with Elon Musk?
Yeah, they were co-founders of that. So I got to know them somewhat in Silicon Valley when I lived there.
We'll go there next.
Yeah, so he's also a supporter of life extension, longevity.
Oh,
and
really?
Funded that.
But so that's where your interest sparked.
I ended up meeting a lot of these strange characters that are in the tech world that are also interested in these transhumanist technologies.
Oh, cool.
Futurist technologies. So Thiel set up this thing for kids to say, don't go to college or take a year out of college. It was actually more radical when it started. He was basically saying undergrad is a ripoff, and he would pay $100,000 for a 2-year fellowship if talented kids who had gotten into Harvard and Yale and Stanford applied for this thing would come out to Silicon Valley instead and work on their idea.
Right.
So you'd get this all expenses paid thing and a network of mentors such as yourself. Very credible characters like me mentoring these young 18-year-olds and ranting at them and telling them, all of my war stories.
Sure.
But so
well, you got to do it. If you don't, then like they're going to have the same experience, and then how do you fix it?
Well,
so
it's
you gotta
very
do your
hard
part.
because like people are still going to Harvard now, and they don't understand the brand name.
That's
and
what is the marketing.
Right,
though.
I wouldn't have been able to convince myself as my younger self until I had gone there and seen how bad it was.
The system has to change, and what its acceptance criteria of credibility is. And in some way, I think tech is disrupting that because once I started working in Silicon Valley, I worked with numerous people who never went to school for computer science and were self-taught programmers and kick ass.
Yeah, and that's true whenever you have something that's really objective and you can actually measure the work. And most of our global economy is bullshit jobs. So you can't really
Have
tell
you
somebody.
heard of this book?
Yeah, David Graeber, bullshit
Yeah.
work. I'm familiar with him. We were on some of the same mailing lists 10 years ago. So
You know
basically,
David Graeber?
we were all in the same peer-to-peer stuff. Yeah. So back again,
You
after
just blow my mind,
when I
Joe.
burned out of Harvard, I got so frustrated with it. I ended up seeking out this alternative system. So I had a couple of key experiences, right? One was I had this bioethics class with this fairly famous professor. And every one of my classmates and the professor, they were all sort of hostile to biotech, to life extension, human cloning, embryo editing, all of that. They thought they were very conservative. They're like, oh, we shouldn't be doing these things with the new
What was
technology.
their field of work?
I mean, so these bioethics is sort of a ridiculous field of a bunch of philosophers and talking heads that think that they're going to say something profound about how we should use biology, right? In reality, they're just making a professional career, being called up to issue a position statement for one thing or another whenever something pops up in the news, right? So we recently had the world's first gene-edited babies out of China. In
CRISPR.
November, and everyone freaked out about that, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote a paper on that in 2002 discussing and predicting this and saying, here's the potential guidelines, what we should be doing for thinking about doing genetic engineering of humans. Because this has been around for a long time. We've been trying to do this for 100 years. Some Brave New World came out, about 100 years ago. People have been wanting to do some form of eugenics for a very long time.
What does that mean?
Eugenics, essentially the idea that we would shape the human gene pool in a positive direction. And there were
Who
many...
decides what's a positive
Well,
direction?
right. So there's been associations with Nazism and all of these things that kind of tainted it, and you always had these elitist sort of tendencies with it, and it ended up getting tied up with racism and these other ideas. And so there were crazy, like, Nobel Prize winners that tried to start their own sperm bank because they thought they had superior intelligence DNA.
Boy.
Right. So eugenics has sort of been given a bad name. But if you really think about it, we do this in everything we do, from our dog breeding, when we select different traits in our pets, to all of agriculture and all of our animal livestock for a few thousand years. Right. It's just that we've been limited in the way
And
we
then
could do it.
GMO would be part of it, no?
Yeah, so I am very much in favor of GMO. I don't like the corporate
It also has a
overlords that
bad
control.
sort of connotation attached to it because the average person doesn't understand enough about it.
Yeah, I mean, everything is GMO in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay, people are sort of confused about this. Organisms exchange genes all the time in their environment. Bacteria do what's called horizontal gene transfer, where they can actually acquire certain genetic material from their environment. Typically, gene transfer is thought of as vertically passed down from generation to generation, but there's all sorts of tricks that nature has done, and nature is much weirder than we ever understand or give it credit for. There's naturally occurring hermaphrodites that are both genders. There are things that change gender in their own lifetime. So humans that don't really study biology get very hung up on a lot of things and say stuff like, well, that's not natural, or blah, blah, blah. They can't even handle transgender people.
It's
right?
funny, people
like,
have this perception about chemicals, right? Like
Sure.
everything is a chemical, though.
yeah, everything
Water is
in
a chemical, guys.
All of the things in the periodic table, every element of the universe is a chemical element, right? So there's no such thing as natural,
There's no natural anything.
or non-natural. By definition, whatever exists is natural. It's part of nature. And it's the combination.
Even if it's synthesized in a lab, you're taking
Exactly.
natural pieces.
But, the configuration of molecules can either be arsenic or anthrax, something that's poisonous, or it can be beneficial, or the dosage amount determines that effect. So
Right.
you can overdose on water and
Fair
die from water, drinking too much water. You could overdose on most any substance. But anyway, so we got kind of on a tangent there. But so back to this thing, right? So I had a couple of fundamental experiences. One was using Napster and doing the first file sharing when I was a freshman, because I for the
remember
first time
downloading
had
stuff from Napster, man.
unlimited access to music. So then I thought, well, this is amazing. It could transform the economy. We could all produce our own content. And then
Like
I was
this.
exactly like what we're doing today, 18
Right
years
now.
later, right? Yeah, but then I learned, I did this biology ethics class, and I was exposed to these ideas and disagreed with all of their conservative people that were afraid of this. So I said, well, I got to find the people that are the opposite, that are embracing the potential. And then I got connected to the longevity, life extension movement, or said we're going to be able to engineer ourselves to live hundreds of years, thousands of years, indefinitely, and basically cure aging, among other, far out ideas. And at the time I thought, this is crazy. Is this real? Right. And then I met some of the leading people in the field. And, again, they've been working on this since the 1980s because there was a lot of optimism around technology. Mm-hmm. You have to remember, we landed on the moon. People thought we were going into space. And unfortunately, things kind of stalled out. We had the internet and all these other things.
Stopped on that.
Well, we stopped pushing many boundaries in what we'd call like hard technology. And partly it's because the internet was so profitable and lucrative, everybody started dumping money into that. And then you end up with, well, what happened to our flying cars? What happened to our
it seems like it's all gone into making software, which now is dictating based off of your interest patterns what to sell you, and it's automated to sell you that shit.
Yeah, so you can get stuck in these loops that are unfortunately...
I think majority of us, and I was recognizing this in myself, I'm stuck in some of these, and I find myself, and I catch myself, and I have to get myself out of it. Like,
exactly.
Like, wait, I've just been scrolling through like a marketplace. What am I doing?
Well, it's been engineered to hack your brain.
Right, they're hacking your biological systems to keep you interacted.
So, but anyways, by the time I ended up getting out towards the end of Harvard, I was about like burned out. I was practically going to have a nervous breakdown.
So you did finish the 4 years, though.
Yeah, I was like, I got to finish, be done with this in 4 years. But it almost felt like it almost killed me, right? Yeah, because I was so depressed. By the last year, I was just in complete chronic depression the whole year. Then one of my other classmates killed himself. I was working out, but I'll tell you the interesting thing about it. The year that I got out, I gained about 30 pounds muscle because I'd been so stressed the whole 4 years. I made no progress for 4 years. I didn't add anything to my lifts, and it was dark all the time. It was super dark in Boston. So I'm like super white.
Yeah, you're pale.
And I'm like, as soon as I got out, the whole first 12 months, I was eating more food all the time. I added like 80 pounds to my lifts. My bench went up a huge amount. Man. It was like this huge surge because I just had 4 years.
Testosterone was probably suppressed.
It was like a prison camp. It's almost like I call it like a concentration camp. I'm exaggerating, okay? Sure. But the effect is similar on your immune system and the stress and all that. So by the time I was finishing up, I went to some lectures of this professor who was visiting, giving a talk, and I came across this whole idea of peer production, commons-based peer production, which to me was just like a light bulb. It unlocked this whole theory to me that said, okay, well, this is what's wrong with capitalism. This is why I'm miserable, hating everything here at this institution of Harvard, which is supposed to be a wonderful place with billions of dollars of resources, but everyone's miserable, right? So this professor wrote some of the first analysis of this, and now a bunch of people have, you've probably heard about the sharing economy and all these things, right?
That's what the scooters are, right? Like the bird scooters.
Those are all versions of it. Those are kind of like capitalism's attempt to co-opt it. Because what happens is usually we had things like couch surfing originally started up in San Francisco area. Craigslist was originally a purely peer-to-peer free resource. It's a way for you to advertise without having to go into newspaper classified listings, right? And eventually Airbnb came along and took over that model of couch surfing, but made a venture capital-based hyper-capitalist version. So capitalism is very resilient and will resist many attempts to subvert it for change. But yeah, so the best example was a Linux operating system, right? So we had in the 80s, Free Software Foundation, Richard Stallman started this, and then in the 90s, Linus Torvalds came along and modified it into what became Linux. And today, most of the world runs on some versions of different open source stacks, right? So you have different pieces of technology that are all modular and can talk to each other. And so now you can spin up your own, your entire podcast, right? Running on top of a stack of these open tools.
That's what Apple took it to the next level, but still at the core.
And you can always sell Linux. A proprietary version. You can always sell a commercial version, but the fact is the freedom of that free version keeps everyone honest.
Oh, for sure.
So if the commercial provider tries to screw everybody, people say, screw that, we're going to fork that, we'll open up this version and people can migrate. So you don't get locked in, again, the way we are to most of our products in society. So a lot
of SaaS is disrupting that now.
Sure. Yeah. but it's
as a
about
service.
more than software. This is about a way of life, right? And if you realize, if you look at the history of humanity, peer production has been here for longer than capitalism and longer than these market forms of exchange. It used to be that the village, you would basically get your neighbors together, and there's a good example of these Amish barn raising. It's a tradition there where you help them raise their barn up, erect the barn, and then when it's their time, you reciprocate. So we've always had these like thousands of years of reciprocal peer-based economic exchange.
Give and take.
And there's another guy, Clay Shirky, who made a career out of this, writing a bunch of books. He talks about basically you used to be able to organize a birthday party, and that was like the extent of what you could do on a love-based peer production model where everyone's intrinsically motivated.
Hold on, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just popped up in my head.
Sure.
How are the girls at Harvard? Do you meet some hot girls
God,
there?
it's
Or were they,
it's
were-
gonna
how
be,
was it?
it's such a stressful situation there. It's like, I mean, honestly, so you know what they would do is they would kind of bust down these girls from the all
Other
girls
schools?
school. They were co-ed. Yeah, they called it the fuck truck. Ridiculous. I never partook of that particular ritual.
You can tell me off air.
No, I know, but seriously, here's the thing. I had a girlfriend the whole time. There was long distance. It was my high school girlfriend.
Damn.
So that was probably not the best decision.
No.
Time, because that was another added stress. I
Sure.
should have been single or enjoying myself doing whatever.
Yeah.
But that was, so I was pretty much spoken for the whole time I was in college.
Damn.
Right, which is probably one of those
would have
things
made a whole nother good
Yeah.
segment, but all right.
that I would do over. Right. So yeah, I guess I was a late bloomer, late
man.
blossomer with that respect, and decided to go out later and make up for lost time.
So you went to London, and that's where you let loose, hey?
Well, no, I mean, I've been in London, Australia, Brazil.
You're like, I
I've
got to take
lived
the
in different
tour
places.
of the islands and everything. What does it have to offer me? You went all out on a buffet. That's essentially what you're saying.
You had enough vanilla, yeah. Right. Well,
Love it.
anyway, so
Love it.
all right. So basically, I listened to this talk, right, where this professor was documenting all these examples of sharing and new ways of building connected production. And the enabling factor was that it gets cheap enough to coordinate people through personal computers, and our transaction costs are much lower. So the reason we have corporations is to solve something basically called Coase's theorem. Ronald Coase is a famous economist who came up with the theory of the firm, and basically says that transaction costs drive corporate organization. So in order to solve the cost of communicating across different divisions, you end up forming a company to do that. And then you basically default to an authoritative model as opposed to an anarchic, cooperative, non-hierarchical model. And it used to be, people think we could only do this. This is why we have governments, we have armies. You could only fight a war if you've got, a command structure that's top down. And there's a whole other guy, John Robb, has done all this stuff about the next generation warfare. He calls it open source insurgency, open source warfare. And he's documented how for the last 15 years, ISIS, Afghanistan, all of these different groups that basically they've adopted open source style guerrilla tactics.
Pretty much, they're like outsourcing vigilante
Yeah,
work.
and it's so there's no one in command. They're activating terrorists. Even
But ask you, why aren't we doing the same thing though? Like in some disguise, like all these secret operations. I mean, that's what we're doing too. Aren't
well, that's still like an officially carried out, like CIA. All these special forces have like official formal command structures.
we? Right,
Whereas
but I thought they employ like local.
yeah, they do some of that, but it's not.
that's where, like, the
it's-
whole,
It's not the same as like an open source insurgency. Like anyone could start a cause, right? Like this. You don't.
Well, now
have
it's
to-
social media, even faster.
Right, exactly. So all these things are connected, right? And it's been driven by this decentralized, sort of effective distributed technology.
Fair enough.
And the hope was that we'd be able to harness these forces for good, right? In a way that you could, not be alienated from your work. Again, like this is the classic thing of capitalism. You're working for the boss that owns the factory, right? The stereotypical, model. And we'd hope that we're going to have an explosion of what we call peer production. First in digital media, as you're seeing with musicians could start their own thing without a record label. You don't have to be signed to a contract.
Right.
And instead of the top 40 artists, you could have 4,000
Yeah, like
different people
SoundCloud is
on Spotify and on this stuff, right? So it becomes a long tail distribution. And then that says instead of like a blockbuster model where it's only a few top 10 artists get all the views, you could have everyone get a few thousand views and everyone becomes a creator and a producer and exchanging value again. And in reality, they did not end up in this utopian thing. Of course, the celebrities and people still capture the platforms, you know, things like the Kardashians, these people that it
But I
baffles
mean, there's a
me,
lot more
right?
people that are able to tap in. And
Sure.
the early adopters
They're-
of the platforms are definitely able to become more influential. But I suspect in the long term, it's going to, you know, the sort of 10-second fame is going to disappear and people are going to start seeking for substance rather than just.
I mean, that's the hope, but it's all based
know.
on our information algorithms, right? But the idea
Fair
would be
enough.
that there's not going to be mega blockbuster celebrities. Broadcasting is done. Everything becomes multicasting or narrowcasting, where you have small, different audiences. So if you look at the 20th century, was like an anomaly. We never had these things like mass broadcast radio and TV. When we started out, it was just NBC, ABC, CBS, only three main broadcast networks. Then you had cable, right? But things like the Super Bowl, where literally half the nation watches one event, that's kind of a weird thing in history. It never, like, it's not normal.
Right.
And it's fixating our attention on one thing, right? So it's actually much better, more efficient when we can DVR everything, put it on your thing to watch, time shift it, watch it on your schedule. We don't all have to tune in at the same night, you know, of the week for that hit
Yeah,
show.
Netflix is killing it.
Right. But so all of this was like a hope that we could return to kind of ways like it used to be hundreds of years ago before this particular mass model in the like.
So you're
early
saying
20th century.
software has pretty much enabled or leveled the playing field in many different ways.
That's the hope, but then there's still these distribution monopolies. Like it's ever present. It's always a battle.
You
right?
think about it, there's still a few, right? Like, I mean, AWS,
Right.
and then Oracle
They're the
runs
biggest hosting
the
thing
biggest
now. Yeah.
database. You know, everybody's got an Oracle database, and you know, you get concerned where it's like, okay, well, we are putting some of these powers in one or two houses.
Sure, yeah, but I mean,
know?
so it's these cycles of centralization, and then when that gets so bad and brittle, you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? I mean, and arguably the United States is at this point too now.
A lot of people would argue that, right? I mean, you're right, because we're at the point where you would think the revolution is about to happen.
When these institutions fail, then you have a wave of decentralization, but then you have re-centralization again. And right now, all that's going at hyperspeed in the cryptocurrency world, right? So I've been immersed in that for a few years. All of that stuff came out.
Did you make a lot of money?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get in it in the first wave. I should have been in like 2013. But it's not too late.
I have a quick story about that.
Yeah,
When
sure.
we were in college, so I went to Saddleback College for a couple years, and then I transferred to UC Irvine for my last two.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished my computer science degree in 4 years. While I was at UCI, Bitcoin was starting to become kind of popular.
Yeah.
We ended up, a couple of my friends ended up building a miner.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they put it in my apartment. Reason being, because the way my apartment was built, I got my rent, including
Yeah, your utilities capped.
right?
That's
Well, the
hilarious.
funny thing was,
Get you
we let
kicked out.
we let that miner on, right? And then a month later, I got my utility bill. It was like 3 times what it is, and they're like, "We're gonna let you off this hook this one time."
yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna unplug this thing right now." But man, shit,
That's funny.
but they did capture a few, I believe, and one of my friends did make a fuckload of money
I bet.
off of that. So it's great.
Well, again, it's very still early, and it's all relative, right? So I believe Bitcoin is like probably the most important innovation.
It's like
of
a
the
brand
last-
now.
of this whole century.
Of this whole crypto.
Right. So you can always get Bitcoin now and
Yeah.
hold it. And it's going to keep going up in waves until potentially the world is using it as a reserve standard for
Right.
all economic value on the planet.
Because for those people that don't know, like, the dollar is considered a fiat currency. It's not backed by shit. Like, it
Right.
used to be backed by the
Not
gold at
gold,
one
that's
point,
right.
but no longer is the case. We're printing and
When the United States
creating
right,
debt all the time.
The U.S. manipulated the world order to basically use the dollar as a reserve. So we made the Saudis denominate oil's futures contracts in dollars. And if we uncouple from that, it's going to be historically
It's President
huge
Nixon, right,
shift.
who made that
yeah,
shift.
that's right. From the
Crazy,
gold.
man.
But anyway, I mean, we could talk about Bitcoin all day, but it's
Sure.
it's fundamentally like like potentially a way that we can move to more freedom in the world.
So after Harvard, after your
Yeah.
sort of weird experience there.
Sure.
know,
So I just became obsessed with this peer-to-peer
yeah.
model, and I saw it everywhere. I was like, well, every
And you were
industry.
still in Boston when you were seeing this, or you were out?
Yeah, when
at
I
this
was finishing at Harvard, and then I ended up going to London.
point? Where did you
and-
start to see more of this sort of open source share?
Yeah, I mean, so it's literally started first in digital media, and then we had Wikipedia, YouTube, all those platforms, and then we kept seeing it coming into the physical world with ride sharing and hotels and anything where there's excess capacity that someone can list and connect for low transaction costs means that the peer production model is viable. Right. And so then I basically joined this mailing list. I met this character, Michelle Bowens, who's the first guy to document all this. He lives in Thailand. He had started this peer-to-peer group, and a lot of these people were on it, like Dave Graeber, even the Satoshi, the inventor of Bitcoin, was on it. He announced Bitcoin to our list in the end of 2008.
Is it an actual person?
Yeah.
Or is it an organization? Do you think?
Satoshi was probably this guy named Hal Finney is their best theory. He died in 2014. He was a programmer that had ALS. So if it was anybody, it's very likely he could have been Satoshi.
He's like the top notch, the best programmer that ever
you
existed.
didn't have to be the best in the world. What he had to do was combine all of these ideas that had been around there for about 20 years and then have it in that unique white paper and get it out there. And then, it just happens that the incentives were correct, where people actually mined this thing and they did it long enough that it got the network effect. And now it's potentially taking over the world. Right. Because even Bitcoin's probably wasn't the best implementation of this thing, but now that it's good enough and it has the network penetration, it's probably game over.
It's more like, I think there's a definite distinction between Bitcoin and blockchain. It's a subset. So the technology is of blockchain.
I tell everyone not fall for this thing. That Bitcoin is the only particular blockchain that matters. It's the only non-political form of money on the planet. It's what's
the word I'm looking for? The framework that is used by blockchain can be fundamentally utilized in contracts.
Yeah, you can do a bunch of different applications.
Yeah.
The problem has been that people just got on the bandwagon and they wanted to do blockchain for all sorts of things you don't need to do it for.
There's stupid shit for blockchain right now. Startups that are for I was reading some articles about this. It's like blockchain startups are just all over.
You could do it for anything, but in most of the time, a database will work better. Right? Yeah, but one of the only areas we really needed this and why it can be worth this trillions of dollars is a currency that can't be fucked with.
Yeah, that has some merit to it.
Yeah, that's not able to be manipulated by governments, state actors, and others.
Agreed.
So anyway, I ended up going over to London to do a master's. And again, I had delved into the biology side.
What did you do your master's in again?
This was history of science, philosophy of science. So I wanted to look at the history of scientific theories and kind of it's sort of like a meta theory of science. It's like, what is science? How does science function? So I think that was valuable. I mean, it's sort of like I could have just read all those thinkers. I didn't need to be at the London School of Economics.
But it gave you a dedicated time in society to do it.
Yeah, but it's like, all right, we'll go over there and do this for you.
Yeah.
But so then I went to Australia to work with the Molecular Biology Agriculture Group, and they were one of the first to try to do an open source biology. They were going to release a toolkit for doing GMOs and say, hey, Monsanto and these big corporations are like the Microsoft of crops, and they're controlling our global food supply by controlling the tools to edit the genes. So what if we release a toolkit for farmers? Anyone in the world wants to modify plants and democratize agriculture again, because since the 1980s, these big multinationals kind of cornered the market on seeds. They even sell you seeds that have a terminator seed. It's built in where it will die. You can't replant the seed. So for thousands of years,
you have to keep buying the seed.
Yeah, but thousands of years, farmers would always replant. They would share seeds with each other. They made that illegal. So if you pirate the seed, or even if it drifts off your field onto someone else's things, they've sued people for that case. All kinds of crap. Right. So I'm very much anti-intellectual property. By the way, I'm against all forms
very open
of
source.
It because it's just a monopoly. It's just a rent-seeking thing. So this has all been about trying to come up with new models for innovation. How do we fund R&D and do this when we intend to commercialize it with a business model that's open source. And so there's ways to make money with products and services without charging for the license or royalty and trying to control the underlying idea. And if you look at the history of commerce, most successful things are examples of that. You have to build a business on top of a technology. You shouldn't be trying to charge for the technology itself. Technology is not really valuable. It's just a tool to do things and build and exchange value, right? But most of the time, companies and industries are going to try to extract.
Well, it's a short-term grab, isn't it?
They're going to try to charge rents, on whatever. But we would never have anything if we didn't have standards, whether it's like a USB standard, all of our protocols
People have
powering
to
the
agree
internet.
on something.
Yeah, you need to
Protocol.
get everyone to around an open protocol, and then people can compete and build an ecosystem on that. But most of our economy is like Apple is notorious for this, of course, right? They're one of the worst actors, right? But they have faced competition from Android and from all of the stuff in our smartphones. There's like commodity chips, made in Korea, made all in these different foundries around the world. And that's why your smartphone is now essentially cheap. It's been subsidized, right? So we've been trying to make that happen in biology. And the question was, how can you bring that into life sciences? Because it still costs $1 billion to create a drug, to bring a treatment from an idea to actually get it ready for patients. Or it costs $1 billion to get a crop approved, right? So that means only these big pharma companies, big Monsanto ag companies end up dominating the market. And no one likes that. That's largely why people are freaked out. They don't understand like GMOs. It's because you've got these big actors doing that. And it's we've been trying to say, hey, no, this is just a tool. Like gene editing is a tool, like anything else, programming biology, the way that you're programming your apps, right? And that's the future we want, is where anybody
And that's what your business is.
Right. So we've started this lab here. I did one previously in Silicon Valley that was like one of the first ever biohacker lab in the world. Started in a garage in our house. And my roommate.
What defines it a biohacker lab?
Yeah, I mean, the biohacking is a term. It gets thrown around a lot, and it's sort of edgy. It has some problems to it because it's not that precise.
About drugs mostly.
Well, it depends. There's a bunch of different groups doing different types of biohacking. Some refer to it, as like self-experimentation on their body and trying to optimize some aspect of their mental cognition, functioning, or their hormones, or their, that performance enhancement, right? We're talking about more like tinkering with living systems and programming and building, prototyping biology, just like you would come into the garage and do welding and soldering, and you would prototype electronics, hacking electronics. So if we could bring that into biology, then that means you don't have to be forever in a degree, getting a PhD postdoc, and then only in a university where you'd even have access to getting into that lab equipment.
So what's the criteria to get into your lab?
Well, so basically for me, I'm usually dealing with early stage little companies. They're seeking space. They call up. I talk to about 5 or 6 per month, and I just rent them a bench. You can come in. This is the workspace. And it really is, it's tough. You got to have some kind of funding because it's expensive to do research. You can spend several thousand a month on materials.
Right.
Right. So if you don't have some sort of grant or a small investment, or you just pay for it out of your day job, a lot of them do have other jobs in town, and they work in biotech during the day.
Making the 24-hour fitness of labs.
Well, a little bit, yeah. But it's just, it doesn't scale in the same way that those do, but it's not that different from doing a gym, right? I mean, I've used that analogy before. It's that back in the day, only weirdos had access to weights. You had to build your own weight set in the backyard, and then it became a mainstream thing in the 70s and 80s, and now you have these franchise things. Now, biology is probably not going to be that widespread, but in another 10 years, we do imagine much of it can be done on a laptop. You'll use design software to build the genetic circuits to basically see what the protein is going to look like. If we can ever get good enough at simulating protein folding, you can do a lot of this just with your computer. Push the button, send the order off to specialized companies
What kind of stuff
that fabricate it.
Are these people that want to do open source sort of biology coding? What kind of things are people interested in developing, if you can share any?
Yeah, I mean, it's very broad, right? Because you're going to say, like, biology is really, you need to think in terms of, like, the 20th century was chemical industry, You remember The Graduate, the famous old movie, plastics, plastics, plastics. That was the advice.
And now it's like, stay away from plastics.
Right, exactly. It's because we used petroleum, which is a short-term loan from the environment. Basically, we were greedy. We wanted like the quick fix. We kind of exhausted all of our, it took many millions of years for all of this stuff to store under the ground from dinosaur bodies and stuff.
Fossil fuels.
Right. Okay. And so we harvested all that. So the idea behind this biotech revolution is that we're going to replace most of those bad processes that are energy intensive, bad for the environment, with biological manufacturing, biological production. Our bodies do it already. We've been doing it for millions of years. It's one of the most marvelous, efficient things there is. We're even talking about using DNA as the next data storage medium instead of chips. You're going to have DNA-based data storage because it lasts 100 years at room temperature, right? There's some drawbacks because it's very slow. It's very slow to read.
How much data can you store in DNA?
You can store everything pretty much, like your entire Library of Congress. Like
You're
it's
telling
much
me
more
like a strand of DNA in a petri dish?
You could essentially store all the world's data, right, in this tiny compact format because our
You're saying, but how would binary be stored on a?
So I'm not an expert on this, and so basically, storage is not the challenge as so much as recalling it, because you have flash memory, you've got solid drive, we've got old magnetic tapes, right? So for doing this and encoding it on DNA, the technology is now there to basically sequence everything cheaply because it's come down and cost so much. To pull it up would take a long time. So it's not going to initially be used for anything that would be rapidly accessed. It would be like long-term Library of Congress.
What's something in the next 10 years we should expect coming out of like biological startups or biotech startups?
It's all over, man. I mean, traditionally you have, of course, medical therapeutics.
People trying to fix diseases,
right?
Curing illnesses.
That's been very difficult for 50 years, right? You've got this whole biomaterials field. We've got printing organs and tissues. We're going to be able to eventually. The goal is to have replacement organs.
Well, let me ask you, what do you favor more than others? Like, what is it that you think is more valuable at this time?
I am most urgent about human longevity, life extension.
Gotcha.
Right, because
if we can stay healthy long enough, we have more time to figure stuff out.
Yeah, and we have this huge amount of old people coming with the baby boomers. It's going to decimate our economy because you're going to have more frail old people than ever before. There's not enough nursing homes to deal with it. It's going to be a huge drain. Japan is already there because they had such an elderly population, and their ratio is all messed up because people are having kids later. So now you've got like a giant old generation. There won't be very many young people to take care of them. You're going to have robotics to help take care of elder care. That can help some.
Can I ask them the obvious question?
Yeah, sure.
Is it worth keeping those people alive? I'm not saying this in like a,
right,
in a negative sense of like, but I'm just thinking like,
well, if you look at what we do now, of course we do everything wrong. We do it all backwards. You spend way too much money late in life to try to prolong a tiny bit of life in bad quality.
Yeah, you spend your whole life
right,
like not taking care of yourself, earning money, and then you spend the money to take care of your bad health.
Well, but we're talking about a new medical paradigm. So I'm working with some groups of early adopters. We have a bunch of people in their 50s, and they're going ahead and experimenting with. There's a lot of drugs that are already approved for other diseases that can actually just be used in combination for healthy, life extension to try to slow your aging and ameliorate some of the damage of aging.
Right.
So the hope is in the future, you're never going to get debilitated in chronic disease like that. We're going to intervene earlier and earlier in the process. And in the future, you'll just go get like a booster shot. You'll get a cocktail of longevity treatments every 5 to 10 years. You'll have these different stem cells, thing every 5 years. It'll be different timelines. So you basically keep yourself from ever getting to that disease state.
Right.
And we have to change the whole medical system right now because it's configured and set up only around paying for a doctor's visit for a disease that's already happened. You've got to have a preventive model where it's like a subscription-based thing where you're all rewarded for staying healthy, and you never dip below this like red line because it's easy to correct if you're just a little bit below, you can still bring it back up. And once you're down, it's like anything. It's like weight gain. Once you've gained way too much weight, it's so much harder to come back. It can all be done. We have a lot of the tools to hack behavior. We're just applying it for evil purposes right now for advertising and marketing. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of different combinations that we can.
What do you recommend, I guess, would be a good question for people that, majority of the people that ask me this question, from my former bodybuilding experience about health and fitness is like, how do I lose weight or look better, feel better? But most of them are not necessarily willing to go to the gym for 4 or 5 days a week. And that's fine.
Yeah.
So like in terms of, the way our diet structured. So I guess a couple parameters I'm going to put on you and then have you answer is like, let's cover for somebody that would be a full vegetarian,
right?
Not necessarily a vegan, but a vegetarian. So not eating meat. Because I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for you to get non-carbohydrate protein sources.
Yeah, it does, definitely.
So it's like, okay, that's a tough enough challenge to fight. And for people that probably already have really shitty insulin sensitivity because, I think as you mentioned, most people are pre-diabetic or diabetic
from
already.
Western
from
diet.
just the way of lifestyle in this country.
I mean, there's not a simple, any kind of one answer to this because we have a multi-billion-dollar self-help industry and fitness industry and all this. And
I just want to know your opinion.
Basically, anything can work and nothing can work. It depends on how intensely you do it. It's more about applying yourself to the process. Like, I think the simpler is the better because the more complicated steps you have, the less you're going to adhere to anything. So the simplest things you can do are high-intensity interval training, some kind of sprint or other thing, and it's got to be uncomfortable. If you're not huffing like you're about to wheezing, if you feel like a little bit sick after you've done the thing, you did it right. If you're just like working in your comfort zone, you don't shock your system. You have to challenge the mitochondria, do all these other things to create that adaptation response. And again,
your body
that's
wants to stay in homeostasis. It doesn't want to change.
So you have to do this high intensity. Doing long-term jogging or treadmill or elliptical thing for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, that's not going to do anything to your baseline calorie. It makes a tiny bit of difference. So
it just takes a lot longer.
Where you see it doesn't work. You'll see people do tons of cardio and they're skinny fat, right? You have to do interval intensity. It's a categorically different type of training. It makes your oxygen consumption ramp up. And then you're burning more all the rest of the day. So that's like your number one thing is some kind of high intensity. And then, I've been experimenting a lot with fasting. A lot of people can't stick to this. They get low blood sugar.
Naturally fasting. I've been like waking up and generally the first meal I'll have will be like 12 or 1 o'clock, sometimes even like as late as 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to eat. But then like around the time when I want to eat is usually in the evening. And then I don't know if you think I want to know if you think it's bad, but I usually even eat before I go to bed.
Yeah.
And I haven't noticed necessarily adverse effects from it.
It's probably fine. I mean, it depends. People react differently. Sometimes they say not to eat after 5 or 6 p.m.
Well, I mean, that doesn't make sense if you're fasting all day.
Yeah, for the rest of the day. I think, the number one people fail at all this stuff because they just can't stay on a program. So the main thing is get some simple program and stay on it. Consistency.
Do what you can work.
Consistency
Otherwise,
is the only thing that matters because nothing else matters if you're not actually doing it. So
all right, but you're giving me answers that I can already find online.
Right, exactly.
What I want to know
not
is
like a secret thing. There's a bunch of weird exotic crap that you can do.
What
you
about
can do ice
like
exposure?
What about like some nootropics or some drugs that people have experimented with that you know of that you can tell me about or talk to about?
Sure. I mean, that's a whole can of worms. There's a zillion nootropics that are tried in different combinations, and you need to just slowly experiment with this. Don't go overboard. People often.
Well, okay, let's start with something that's low risk.
I mean, like paracetam is the oldest classic.
Paracetam.
Thing. Most of these things are just what they're doing is increasing blood flow to the brain, right? Exercise is going to do that same thing.
Sure.
Right.
Paracetamol?
Paracetam, not paracetamol.
Oh.
Piracetam. Yeah, so this is like the classic original one out of Russia and stuff that's been used for decades.
Russia.
Well, a lot of these are pioneered over in Eastern Europe. Yeah, it's a pretty subtle.
Is this how they're getting to us, Joseph? Is this how Russia's taking over?
No, this has been around before that. And these guys, the Qualia guys, they're based here in Encinitas.
Oh, really?
It's a company called the Neurohacker Collective. There's a bunch of
brain dust, really?
there's a zillion companies marketing their own branded
Sure.
thing now.
But how do you know any of this shit works?
You got to just do your own research, and then you can subtly start small doses and then track it, document it, look at your cognitive work that you're doing, so you can measure certain
How much of it's placebo?
Yeah, well, exactly. There's always that element to all this, but I would say fundamentals are about habits, establishing that, and then you add these sprinkles on top, right?
Yeah, I'm not trying to ask for what is like a magic pill you can take to become, superhuman or anything.
Ritalin and Adderall are
Those are
highly
insane.
sought after because of this, right? And people have become addicted to that, and they're using them, dependent on it.
I played around with Adderall in college to like study, and then I even played around with Adderall. I shouldn't even say the word play, because it's
right.
not a joke at all. It's a very serious substance. It's quite dangerous, actually. And some of the things I noticed was the insane amount of appetite curve.
Yeah, it'll definitely help
I
you
can
diet.
literally go.
A lot of people use it as a diet
lot of people
aid
use it
too.
in dieting, and I didn't know this.
All amphetamines will have that kind of response.
Apparently, so one of I had one of those kind of twisted coaches from the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff he told me was like, yeah, the girls just take cocaine, so they diet, because apparently cocaine does the same thing, is that you're not gonna
It's a central
want to
nervous
eat.
system stimulant like that.
And like, so Adderall was such a trippy thing, because you could definitely notice. So if I took it like 2 or 3 days in a row, and I didn't take it the next day,
You're
I
withdrawing.
definitely felt like my brain was not sparking properly, and I definitely knew that I wasn't sleeping as like I was asleep, but I was not asleep.
Yeah.
Like your eyes are closed, you're laying there, you're aware of the actions that you're doing, but for some reason you're definitely hyper sensitive to everything around. You're not fully like in deep sleep at all. Such a trippy drug, man, and I can't believe we're giving that shit to kids.
Yeah, well, that's
little
part
fucking
of the
kids.
whole like medical complex where a drug becomes kind of push for a particular indication, and then everybody aligns around it. The psychiatrists do what the drug reps are pushing, and the parents don't investigate very much.
I even saw this in one of the documentaries about pharmaceuticals, where they were basically saying doctors, and I have a lot of them in my family, right? So I'm not saying that all of them are bad or anything. I'm just saying doctors will listen to these pharmaceutical reps as if these pharmaceutical reps know what the fuck they're talking about.
The doctors don't have time to read any articles, primary literature themselves, because they're overstressed in the system. And then these slick sales reps who are pretty much right out of college or somewhere. A lot of times, honestly, it's a girl with a big chest. I had a friend that we knew, she did that for like 12 years.
And they make a lot of money.
They make a lot of money because
I thought about going into pharmaceutical sales.
It's legalized drug pushing is basically what it is.
You're legalized
right?
drug
And
pusher.
so what I've been advocating for a number of years now is like we get rid of that system. We have only patients themselves all freely exchanging information about drugs and generating their own reports. And like, because right now it's like FDA signs off on something, but there's no actual guidance on marketing and how the sales stuff is really carried out.
Right.
It would be much better, I think, if we had all of this stuff in the open. I'm saying deregulate it in some ways, because you can actually take some of the perverse incentive out when you don't have a like mercenary sales force out trying to increase utilization for a particular drug and a particular disease. They'll invent new disease categories to stretch the thing to try basically get more use for a drug.
It's crazy.
But I mean, to say there's not like a drug is neither good nor bad. It's how the drug is used. There's some drugs that are kind of bad, like heroin. There's not many good, it's not going to be too many.
Well, I believe it was wasn't it like a painkiller at first?
Yeah, right. Exactly. But there's some, like there's properties of drugs that make them unwise to use for routine cases. Right.
What about like, what's your take on people extracting, substances from plants like DMT or psilocybin from mushrooms?
I mean, again, it's largely because we've banned it for so long that people are forced to kind of underground,
just
having
curiosity,
to do their own thing. It would be better if we had made this a legitimate area for research.
Because from all like some of the research that I've done into it, it seems to have a lot of benefit cognitively. Like psilocybin, Dr. Jordan Peterson is a very famous clinical psychologist now. He talks about some research studies there where people that have addictive habits and then giving them psilocybin to treat that almost gives them like much more openness as a trait. And it's kind of like,
Right.
well, how do you actually give a trait to somebody,
It
right?
can
But-
shift you because we're all on these different spectrums. Right now, we pretty much use alcohol to shift our consciousness.
right.
People have been doing this for thousands of years. It's just that an industry came up around alcohol and legitimized that. Remember, we banned alcohol for a while in
Prohibition was going on.
right? But for whatever reason, psychedelics became, marginalized in the 1960s.
Right.
And had been forbidden for 40, 50 years. And now it's finally coming back now, and they're doing trials in depression.
Have you
and other
experimented with
medications.
any?
Not that much, no. Some of my friends are into that and consciousness research and work. So I may be doing some this year. I might do a retreat with one of them.
That'll be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to have you come back and share
I'm
with me what it's
so,
like.
whatever. I just don't know. Like, we don't want to supercharge, I think, because I'm pretty.
Well, have you tried
like,
meditation?
I have tried some when I was in London. I did for that year. I joined a group that had a meditation school, and I had a hard time sticking with it. I'm able to stay with my bodybuilding and a few things, but then it was like you got to establish a new habit.
I think it's
like,
very, very important, Joseph, to be able to sit still
sure
and not like be
Have
fidgety
anything.
all the time. Because I find that even sometimes when I'm trying to sit still, this thing doesn't want to shut up.
right.
And I think there's a certain amount of practice that you gain from trying to sit, intentionally in one place and be like, I'm just going to not judge all these inside thoughts in my head. And essentially, I found that to be sort of the, I guess, not purpose of meditation, but a definite byproduct that makes you feel really good. Because when you can sit there and realize that your mind is chaotic and it's just like this computer that's constantly trying to compute the world around it and all the different sensory inputs that you're giving it. I mean, it's a fascinating tool if you understand that.
Yeah.
But so many times we get caught up in that loop of that fascination that it's producing. And we're like, holy shit, there's all this stuff going on in my head, but you think it's actually happening for real. And not if you actually sit down and realize that none of that chaos is actually happening. It's all made up in my head. And you only realize that when you're like, I just sat down for 10 freaking minutes and I couldn't even make myself be calm. So I think it's very fundamental. I feel like they should teach this in school.
Yeah. Well, we used to have nap time in school. I guess it was kind of enforced nap time.
Man.
Well, I'm kind of a proponent of what they call unschooling.
Yeah,
which is,
we've definitely been kind of taught this pattern that we need to, undo and adopt a new style of living for sure.
Say that we just do all this in groups that people can self-select and not have formal,
not have anything shoved down your throat.
mandated schooling. I don't think it should be required that you have to go
it's
to
kind
a
of
school.
happening with like Khan Academy started it a little bit,
Right,
and
yeah,
then now you got all these online courses, and I mean some of these big universities even are doing it. I know I've taken a few courses online from Stanford.
Sure, but I mean, and part of the thing with these hacker spaces that we started, there was the intent would be a network of those kinds of workspaces, and you could go between them and then go and do your bio module over here and learn these skills, and then go over to the welding shop and learn the mechanical engineering part hands-on. And the problem has been very difficult to compete because we have to set up these labs and sustain them. And then you're going up against the existing university model, which is basically funded by combinations of property taxes and other things. But in the future, anyone ought to be able to do any course, sign up for it, and show up and demonstrate
I think there's a lot
mastery.
of benefit to that. I mean, it's communally better for us if we have more and more people having access to education. People have the ability to get out of their situation that they feel that they're trapped in. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to keep this, institutionalized and keep it so separated. I'm really happy that
It's
you're doing
taking
what you're doing,
a long
man.
time. I was pretty naive in 2001 when Napster came out. I thought we were going to be a few years later, everyone would be their own
We're
artist,
a slow changing world.
right? And instead, no, the people, they hold on to power for a very long time.
But I don't know. It's kind of weird because in some ways we're slow, but now with social media and things moving at such a rapid pace where the president can say something crazy and the next day it doesn't even matter. So it's like, what matters
well, that's
to
our
people.
attention span has become compressed to nothing, but there's still sort of like these deep change things that are happening on civilization
I definitely
scale.
feel an unrest. People are definitely more at
Everybody's
unrest.
stressed out.
People
freaked
are
out.
definitely
You have anxiety
not
all the
sure
time,
what's
right?
going on. They're freaking out.
But if you look at like astrophysics time, you've got stars, have certain lifetimes, cosmic time. We're like a blip, on that time scale. So things are speeding up, sure, like from a exchange of information perspective. But then like biotech is stuff still taking decades for things that you're
Yeah.
like, what's going on here? Why isn't this going
Is it because
faster?
partly a lot of the money that, like you said earlier, has gone into the tech field and not necessarily the biotech field?
Yeah, it's partly because we're impatient and don't have,
Biotech takes much longer than
all these
software.
investors are spoiled brats now too, because they got
ROI.
rich in the .com pop, and then they're just used to that, and so no one is building infrastructure and doing these long-term things that got us here.
Right.
We spent a long time after World War II laying the groundwork. This is why we had the boom in the 1990s of the .coms, because it all came out of Cold War research and long sustained funding that built some of this infrastructure. And there's a real danger now that some of these institutions, things have collapsed. Even our NIH, National Institute of Health here in the U.S., has been cutting budget for years. That like in real terms of real dollars, the amount of funding has been shrinking for a long
So
time.
how does one go about, okay, so like a startup comes
Yeah.
to you and they want to like, use your labs and facilities.
Sure.
How are people going about getting funding primarily nowadays with this?
It's brutal. I mean, you either have to have some kind of friends and family, like any entrepreneur,
Wow.
or you're writing these grants, which take forever. So a lot of times
Like,
they'll
like
already,
government grants or?
yeah, there's usually these small business innovation grants, but that's, again, it's all like takes 2 years on average. So maybe they already put one in a few years ago and they finally got something awarded, and that's why they're calling me,
Right.
because they need space. It's a real problem we need to solve by basically educating. We've been trying, and my friend up in Silicon Valley helped start one of these other accelerators that became the biggest in the world at the time for seed stage biotechs. So they try to go out to tech investors and all these guys that made a bunch of money doing some dumb app and be, hey, biology is the next big thing. Biology is the next information technology industry. And that's helping. It's brought new money into the space. At least there's more, but it's just a never ending thing. And again, it comes down to, I was talking about capitalism, these problems of like everyone has to work for a living.
Right.
Well, if we had basic income or some other stipend, then you can just actually go work on your inventions. Okay, so the biggest thing is going to be a systemic shift. And if you had 5 of your friends and you all have your basic stipend, you can pool your money and launch your new innovation, right? So we have a gross maldistribution of the planet's resources and wealth, because Bezos and Gates end up with like 100 billion or whatever each. I guess Bezos
Asymmetric distribution of wealth.
So it's not efficient. I mean, they'll say like that it's efficient. It's actually inefficient to have a few people controlling resources because they don't have access to all the information. Everything shows that markets function better when participants all have a distributed information and distributed money. We would have no market if it's 2 guys that have $1 million each.
Fair enough.
If you have 1,000 people with $1,000 each, now you have a market, even though the size of it is the same. It's $1 million market cap,
Right.
but they got 1,000 people or one guy with $1 million. It's better to have 1,000 people with $1,000 because then they can vote with their $1,000, so to speak, combine, trade, and they end up with a new equilibrium. So this is how markets are supposed to work.
Right.
And what happens over time in capitalism is that it eats markets, and you end up with no more market, just a super monopoly. So that's kind of, I think things like basic income are one big part of the solution. In the next 12 years, we're going to be seeing that. It's going to get worse with automation taking all jobs.
So what has biotech kind of brought in scope for the longevity field?
Sure.
In terms of like, what can we look forward to, or, what do you think?
So right now, we're on the cusp of a new sort of revolution in genomic medicine, being able to do precision, personalized medicine, where
Like based on,
you can sequence a person and start to tailor treatments right to them, and eventually you're going to be able to make therapies and drugs out of your own cells. So gene and cell therapy is the whole kind of emerging category. Very expensive right now, but eventually, and it's
what
really
makes it so expensive?
It's a combination of problems. It's the business model is configured in a way, especially in the United States, that everything's around insurance reimbursement. So you have to get a particular procedure or a particular treatment approved for this one label, one use, and then they're going to charge a lot of money for that. Eventually, you're going to be able to reprogram your own cell types to do many different functions. There's only a few companies right now that will offer for you to take bone marrow out and bank your own stem cells. And then, the thinking is in 10 or 15 years, you'd have access to that and you've saved some of your younger cells.
Tell me a little bit about how stem cells work, because I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not a regenerative medicine expert, but I will kind of give you the bird's eye view. It used to be thought that cells were pretty much fixed at a certain point in time, that you could never reverse them or reprogram them in anything. We knew that certain organisms like salamanders and reptiles could regenerate, you would chop off an arm and it will regrow, but it was thought that like mammals and humans had lost that. So then around 1996, we did Dolly the sheep, the first ever cloned mammal. And then that, again, freaked out a bunch of people. They thought we were on the verge of cloning humans, which didn't happen at the time.
Successfully cloned a sheep?
That was 1996. Yeah, Dolly the sheep.
What?
So that got a bunch of people like freaked out about embryo research. And then we had, when George Bush, W. Bush was president, he kind of put a freeze on embryonic stem cell work
Dolly.
because of the abortion debate, because we have this weird fixation in the United States.
She died.
Well, yeah.
On 2003.
So basically what we learned was that we were wrong about this fundamental assumption on biology that you can actually reset cells by giving them these like epigenetic signals, essentially. So, but as we're aging, our cells are losing that capacity to do any of this, and then you just get more and more worn out. The older you get, you depopulate your stem cell niche. So all of our bodybuilding is actually activating muscle satellite stem cells. But then a lot of times you'll notice the older bodybuilders, they'll hit like age 40 or something, and you can just see how it just looks different from the youthful muscle, right? And eventually you start wasting. Maturity. Yeah, but eventually you waste away, and by your 70s, you have a bunch of atrophy because your stem cell population is just worn out. You've gone through it and depleted it. We have a limited amount, but the reason we form scars, I have like one from where I sliced my thumb on a thing, like certain organisms, will heal and there'll be no scarring at all. And eventually we're going to be able to do that. They've done some experiments where they've applied right after a wound, they've applied some drug compounds that have the stem cell activating effect, and it can actually help heal that thing with no scarring.
I got to look that up more.
Right. So again, and recently, a few years back, a Nobel Prize was awarded for what's called the Yamanaka Factors. It's this Japanese researcher, Yamanaka, who discovered them. So he came up with these 4 different like factors that can serve as a switch to basically set back any cell type to an earlier, you could take any donor thing and turn it into whatever cell type you want. Right. You could take this adult induced pluripotent stem cell, and it used to be thought you could only do this with embryos, but they wanted to find a way around the controversy of using embryos. So if this is the case, then in the future, we'd be able to use your own cells. And you want to be careful about mutations and stuff, because you've accumulated damage over a lifetime just from sun and UV, all this stuff, right? But, the thinking is we're going to be able to essentially reprogram your cells, or administer some combinations of drugs or gene therapy switch to basically reprogram you in your body so you could kind of reverse age. You could roll back one particular organ, make it more into a youthful state. Most of the stem cell treatment so far is just like injecting it into the body, hoping it goes to the damaged area of inflammation. It's very hard to track the outcomes.
I think from what I understand, a lot of like the diseases and stuff end up in many of the sort of organs that are not, as far as I know, what I'm trying to get at is, can your brain really be that optimal at that point? Let's say we increase lifespan.
Yeah. We're going to have to deal with the aging of the brain as well. And the body and the brain influence each other.
Right.
You have the hypothalamus and all this stuff serving as sort of an aging clock. They've done these experiments hooking up old and young animals, where they stitch the young mice and the old mice together, and they show that the old mouse is rejuvenated while the young one is damaged. So yeah, we're going to have a whole like way of delivering therapies into the brain, which has been a problem with the blood-brain barrier. But there's more delivery technologies now They're working on it all the time. It's why it's so hard to treat things like brain tumors, glioblastoma that John McCain died of earlier last year. And that was probably from his skin cancer he'd had years before, and then it metastasizes, ends up in the brain. There's very little we can do for that these days. But in the future, we're going to be able to have special ways to deliver a payload into an area of the brain. When we get better and better at this, you could even give yourself plasticity in your language area and learn language like you were a kid again. Like when you were a baby, you acquired language without remembering
would be
it.
Nice.
Right? But we have to be very careful with this because you could give yourself a brain tumor too. You don't want to upregulate the plasticity so much that you start growing
Tumor.
crazy connections and weird stuff. We could have all sorts of strange synesthesia, people that hear colors and smell sounds. That happens when their wiring gets crossed. There are people who have that naturally happening, and some psychedelics can make you experience that. So in the future, we'll be able to go in and change that neuroplasticity and potentially have brain-computer machine interfaces where you'll have certain, thing grafted into your skull to interface with machines, and you use combinations of biotech and neurotech to either electrically stimulate one circuit of the brain. You could do things for depression this way. Parkinson's, they already try with Parkinson's. They'll do a deep brain implant in here because your motor neurons have died, right? So you're shaking all the time. So they've had some success, but these are very primitive. We're going to need several advances of, just the way computers used to take up the room and then it had to be shrunk down and get more and more powerful. We're going to need that equivalent for these neural interfaces. Then there's dangers of like wire heading, where we just use this thing to give ourselves a hit all day long. You're doing nothing, but you're getting extreme pleasure, like you're a
I think they've
rat.
done some experiments with rats, and they do like 500% of.
So we're gonna have
they
to
have in a coma, right? I believe they get in a coma,
and we're gonna need to learn how to program. We're gonna have direct control over our reward center and over our anger. So you want to be careful that people are not like hacked or being lobotomized, right? You can imagine governments or other people trying to, once we've all implanted ourselves with this, somebody trying to get access to it and then, hack your emotions, right? So that's where it all comes back down to encryption, things that we're talking about with Bitcoin. And it's about taking ownership of your own private keys and getting people in the habit of doing that rather than leaving that to Apple or whoever, that you rely on now for your security. You don't want to have that situation where the devices implanted in your body are all...
And somebody else has the key.
Or get repossessed because the corporate decides you didn't make the payment.
There was a movie about that. Do you remember? It was called Repo Man, I think.
There's a bunch of those. Yeah,
where the guy basically goes to repossess people's organs that they sell them. That shit's
a common
insane.
theme in science fiction, dystopian stuff. Yeah, so, we're it's going to take a combination of new technologies, stem cells, gene editing, gene therapies. There's existing drugs that can be used in the meantime to try to rejuvenate us to some extent. But it is not certain that anybody age 30 and above right now is going to make it. Like there's probably a cutoff point where people born today are very likely to live 1,000 years old, but everybody born before this thing won't make it. Just like when we had the polio vaccine, first antibiotics were discovered that could cure, pneumonia and infections that would have killed you. But 5 years later, we actually had this thing, so no longer, it's not fatal. Now it's no big deal. It's routine because we've surpassed the threshold with our technology, except with some of these infections now, we've got antibiotic resistance.
Do you believe that in your lifetime that you will live longer than average?
It's tough to know. I think we're pretty.
No, I mean you personally.
Yeah,
do you believe
pretty
that?
Conservatively that I think we can get to 120 now with existing technologies and applying preventative medicine.
Well, by all the changes that you're doing to yourself,
it's hard to know. Like the maximum we can do with this paradigm of technologies is around 120 and get there in decent shape, not completely frail and trash. But to get beyond this maximum lifespan, it's going to require these.
So you're essentially doing this not just to gain, that much benefit in this lifetime, but you're really just setting the stage up for the potential of the future.
I'm going to be pissed if we didn't get our act together. It would have been better if I could have been born 30 years later, right? If I'm 6 years old
you're
today.
pushing that innovation or letting the doors for people to come and innovate.
It's upsetting to think about. If you
You
do
know.
the math on this, it's 150,000 per day people that are dying of aging. So every year that this is postponed has destroyed more lives than any natural disaster, any global warming, anything can ever do. This is why climate change is one of the stupidest things that I hear people freak out about. It's because, like, look, it's not going to matter. By the time we've ruined the planet, we're going to be changing ourselves into fish people or something anyway. You'd have fucking gills or something. You can just go live in the
Somebody
ocean.
was telling me,
you know what I mean?
Like, what if we I think we evolved into dolphins or something
Yeah,
like
well,
that?
the thing is, if we're going to Mars or we're doing anything, we're going to have to change our physiology to withstand radiation and do all this anyway.
Yeah.
It's not like we're just going to stay static. I'm saying, yes, we shouldn't have ruined the planet, but it's ridiculous. We're going to be wiped out by artificial intelligence, any other thing, way before we get down 100 years from now and climate change has screwed stuff up. It's not going to be relevant. It's not a real threat on the level of the type of technology we're envisioning. Nanotechnology, any of these things coming could wipe out civilization way faster than climate change. And it's not going to be that hard to change our bodies to adapt to different conditions, because we're going to have to do that when we go into space or wherever we go anyway, right? I mean, there's like only a few places on the planet people want to live, like California, right? Nobody wants to live in the desert or Antarctica now anyway, right? Antarctica is pretty miserable, right? But you can live there if you have to go on a research expedition and live on the base for like 6 months, right? So
What about I don't have enough of an opinion on the global warming and global climate change, but I do know is that there's definitely patterns of, geological patterns you can see that show that this planet's been through so many catastrophic events, and
right.
perhaps we're overdue for another one of those.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, the problem, yes,
Asteroid.
certainly we are screwing up the climate. We're increasing it. But so what? There's all kinds of things happening. Like we'd be destroyed by asteroids anyway, right? We're not building the planetary defense grid that we should have been building. This is a problem for multiple things. It's not just climate change. We don't have a civilization level plan. We can't get the U.S., China, Russia, everybody contribute 1%, 1% of GDP for like the laser defense thing for the asteroid, right? So what it's going to be is going to have to come down to civil society. And what by that I mean all these organizations we've had many throughout history, like the Red Cross was like an international affiliation,
right?
And they were not political. They said we're going to go out on the battlefield. It started in the Civil War. Right. And so the idea was it would be respected by any combatants on whatever side. You would wear that red cross. They would give you safe passage on the battlefield so you could tend to the wounded on both sides. Right. And there's many like examples of that. Linux and Wikipedia is sort of a global commons. You could be a contributor anywhere in the world. We're going to need these kinds of peer-to-peer networked groups to come together and crowd fund the space laser that can defend us from the asteroids, because our damn governments can't agree do it, right? And take on climate control, climate change, and things like this. It can be, I believe, solved by technological groups of experts, technologists, and common citizens coming together, pledging funds. You can do it with cryptocurrency. Actually, you can fund a lot of things. You can issue your own currency just to fund that project, right? That can be used to basically for the good of humanity.
So people, wow, that's a lot.
I mean, it looks like Elon Musk is trying to do versions of this with his stuff, but he basically forms different corporations, right? And that's what's worked for him. Although there's problems with Tesla and problems with SpaceX, and he kind of has them all interrelated and shares the stock between them. So there's a bunch of messy stuff with how he structured that with the SEC, and he's gotten into problems with the SEC in the past. But at some level, I think he's trying to engineer these kinds of things for the future of humanity.
Right.
That was all he could do then, was use
He's
the
doing
corporation.
it more than anybody else right now.
Right. Well, so what I'm saying now is these crypto communities, they've actually created billions of dollars in value in a few years by issuing these tokens. You have Bitcoin, and you had Ethereum was number two.
Yeah, I remember.
So we're just at the beginning of that. We could tokenize all sorts of things. Like you want to go to space, you could set up a tokenized thing to pay into that, so you could get your
People
own.
can elect where the money goes directly rather than paying taxes, so to speak, to
Yeah,
have some
well, exactly.
government decide where it goes, is what you're saying,
And
right?
it's more efficient because you can actually globally allocate it and let everyone vote, and it doesn't get diverted necessarily. I mean, there's problems. There's a lot of problems with crypto scams right now because
It's just early. People are
we're
getting
just
grabbed.
setting the rules. Right? Humans will manipulate every system for their own benefit and try to pull.
I mean, you could argue systems are meant to be manipulated.
Well, yeah. I mean, any human system is going to have people defecting for their own purpose. But when it's transparent like this, you can see it happening on the blockchain. Whereas our governments are just like stealing it. They've been doing that for centuries,
Right.
right? And there's no accountability because they changed the law and they say, oh, we made this legal retroactively, confiscate your property or whatever. No, we changed the law, right? That's just what they've always done, right? So we're headed for this new form of governance potentially, which can be incredible if we can get it right. But
And is that what excites you, Joe?
I mean, it's one of the things that I'm most optimistic about now
Yeah.
is this blockchain stuff and Bitcoin particularly, because I think Bitcoin is
Because
really
I feel
here
like the
to stay.
hype around crypto has died down just a little bit since
Sure,
the
that
big,
was
20,000 to the
Inevitable. That was going to happen. It got too many obnoxious people jumping in for the wrong reasons, like any field that gets hot. I mean, this has happened to everything from bodybuilding to whatever. You got a bunch of wannabes.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. Like you talk
Social
about
media.
bodybuilding. It's like I was just gonna say, social media is so funny. It's like I remember when I was trying to, do bodybuilding and all that. It's like fucking everybody's a coach now. It's like everybody thinks they do one show and they're a coach, or they're a nutritionist now. It's like you're copy pasting the diet that you got from your coach. You don't even know shit about nutrition.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's good because it's mainstream. You've had our activity becomes mainstream, and then the other hand, those people don't stay with it.
No, that's the thing. It's
they
like
wash
you
out.
walk back and you're like, yeah, this shit was about real passion. You can't do this long term.
And that's true for the blockchain. All of the best projects are going strong now while things are quiet, and they're working on the things you'll hear about in 5 years. And
Right.
that was all done during the 2018, 2019 bad times, right? The same is happening for biotech. Like we're going to hit this thing in there'll be another big bubble in biotech, like in 8 years or whatever. And then you'll have this peak of stuff, and then that'll kind of pop. We'll go back, and then it comes back stronger the next time.
So what is it? What is it that you try to like focus on? I mean, tell me a little bit about your this year. What is it that you're focusing on?
So like I said, this year I'm just I'm still getting Bitcoin. My goal is like accumulate Bitcoin for the next, X amount
So
of time.
you're buying it at like $4,000 right now?
I'll just buy some amount all the time. Every
Oh, I
week
see.
you get a certain amount regardless of what your price changes. Because you got to set like a goal. You say, I need 5 Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoin, whatever amount you think a long-term thing is you want to have. And then you just find opportunities to accumulate.
Gotcha.
Set aside whatever amount you can afford to do that.
What else?
Maybe 100 a month. I may or may not do another bodybuilding show this year. I'm going to try to get down to like an all-time shredded low body fat. That's my
That'd
goal.
be nice. What are you planning to do? How are you going to do that?
I've been basically dieting since June 2018, and I'm going to keep dieting. I'm not on a super strict. I'll go like, it zigzags, right? And then you got to refeed and kind of back off.
I think
of
you're
it.
going to need to pick a show if you're going to get that level, because otherwise you're not committed
Yeah,
to a
no,
date.
that's right. I mean, I'll keep pushing it back.
No, I know
right.
some people like that. They're like, yeah, I'm like 10 years out, bro, for my
Right,
next
no,
show.
no,
It's like,
exactly.
I'm just going to constantly bulk until
I
the next
think
one.
Possibly in June, although I have a class reunion I might have to go to.
At Harvard?
I don't know if I will. It would be the first one I go back to, the
At Harvard?
15-year reunion. Yeah.
Shit.
'Cause
You
I've
should go back and
been
see if
so-
that dude's still there.
So bitter. Oh, he's moved on. He ended up taking another position at some other place.
Oh, man.
I looked it up. Believe me, I checked in on this
Yeah.
guy every 5 years or something. Had bad intentions for how I could finally get back at him. But,
Yeah.
I think I'm talking about doing the podcast. I mentioned that we're going to really bring in experts on each one of these components, from stem cells
nice.
to all the different areas I mentioned, where we break it down for an hour
I'll
show
listen.
on each one. And then, I've got a few other business ventures I was trying to put together, but it's like there's never enough time. I've got one thing that's really all around access to certain kinds of cancer treatments. Some of these newly emerged immune therapies can cure people, but it's really for certain types of cancer, leukemia.
Yeah.
The problem is we don't know which people will respond. So it's like you'll either get the cure rate or you won't get any response. and it can be like $1 million. So
Right.
that's the problem. It's like, so we're going to try to address that by maybe taking some of these patients that are on waiting lists who haven't been able to get in because there's only a few hospitals doing it, and it's hard to get into a trial. And we'll see if we can bundle them together. I mean, look, if 10 of you want to come and do this, we'll negotiate a price with the hospital.
Nice.
And we got to do it for cash because it's being priced at like $500,000 per treatment, but that's like the insurance price that they're trying to set. And so the reality is that hospital set up to equipped to do it could basically, we can make them an offer and we could come to an agreement somewhere between $60,000 to $100,000 per person. Right.
Wow.
And so I'm very interested in trying to hack the economics of this because I'm opposed to what's happening right now is where they're setting the price at $1 million per patient because they know most people will be declined. Insurance will refuse to pay for it. But then they'll give it to a few hundred people whose insurance agrees to let them have it.
Right.
And the pharma companies like that because they make the most money that way versus letting the price become pushed down. They'd rather have 50 people get this thing that costs $500,000 than they would 1,000 people have it at 50 grand.
Right.
And because they also like to keep prices high because anything that pushes it down threatens their business model. And that's,
so you're really trying to shake up just the way a lot of the structures
economics
are so rigid.
of healthcare is totally broken.
Yeah.
And then I have this other one around working with patient groups. We have an Alzheimer's patient group. There are a bunch of people that don't have Alzheimer's yet, but they were diagnosed with a gene that's high risk for it. So they started taking their own drug combinations. And
how does one go to find out if they have the gene for Alzheimer's?
You can take any number. Usually it was 23andMe was the main one.
So here's my
that
problem
people
with
took.
one of those. I don't want to put my shit out in any database for
Yeah,
anybody else to have.
I know.
So that's
So
kind of like,
I've had that discussion with people. So I basically just tell you to forget that. They're going to have your DNA no matter what. People are going to get it.
did you hear about, Brad told me about this. There was a guy who got caught in a 30-year-old cold case.
Right, because his relatives did an ancestry test.
Oh my gosh.
Sure. I mean,
I'm not saying there's...
That's true. I mean, I would say just get used to it. We're all going to have our DNA out there in the near future.
I figured. I mean, it's an inevitability.
So you're better off getting that data and learning about it. And there's some blockchain ones that are doing it where you can do your DNA on the blockchain and then they'll like
anonymize
secure it for you. Well, nothing will be anonymous because it literally takes a couple of pieces of data like a credit card thing and a zip code, and anyone can de-anonymize you.
Right.
They'll anonymize you, but anyone that's persistent could run an algorithm and uncover your identity, reverse it back and figure out who it was. So like, that's not really what you should be worried about. You should be worried more about the economics of healthcare delivery, insurance companies and other people starting to screw you because they don't like one thing you're doing in your lifestyle. And then we're not going to fix that by secretly trying to prevent our DNA. You know, your DNA is everywhere. Every time you take a crap or you do whatever, like you're leaving spools of it all over the environment. So I would say it's really cheap now. You can get not just you can do whole genome sequencing now, which used to be super expensive, right? So for a few $100, you can get your whole genome.
So let's say you take the test and you find out that you have the gene for Alzheimer's. What are certain things that people could do?
Yeah, well, that's what we're looking into documenting. We're basically
like doing some research on what helps.
We're enrolling these people in this long-term study. We're going to follow them for 2 years. They're going to be journaling all the stuff, and then we have these advanced metabolomics panel where basically take what's called a mass spectrometer, and even from relatively small sample, little bits of blood, they can run a panel of dozens or hundreds of different markers.
Wow.
And find out all the stuff that's happening from your nutrition, from the drugs you're doing. And we have some pretty good ideas of which drugs, based on the literature and animal studies, actually can help prevent progression towards Alzheimer's. And we're going to start enrolling like 100 people at a time in one of these subgroup studies and have them do it for 6 months. Then they can stop taking it, switch to another one, and you can start basically people doing their own longitudinal trials. And you could be enrolling in one of these. You could do it if you wanted to sign up and do nootropics and be like, I'm going to take this one for 3 months and I want to see which of my marker levels shift. right? And oh, I want to sign up for another study because you find out about this group over here using this different drug, right? And you can all share that data. And we imagine maybe doing it as a subscription service business. It's like $100 a month gets you in the group study platform. So just like Weight Watchers or whatever, used to do a diet program.
What is it that people criticize you the most for about like the field that you're in? What are the major kind of concerns and criticisms you get?
Well, everybody hates a lot of the stuff. They're scared of it. They're afraid.
Just the lack of unknown, right?
Well, it's partly like our whole medical system is all built around the FDA and regulatory approval. People don't like patients being able to get their own medicines in their own hands,
right,
and decide to try things out. People are very uncomfortable with this. It's a very paternalistic system, right? There's also paternalism, like daddy knows best, finger wagging. And this is true to the medical profession. My dad's a surgeon, right? So I grew up with this. And like they have a very certain mindset, and they're not used to being challenged on anything. People don't like the fact that patients are more informed than the so-called experts in many cases now. And the patients, for their own disease, will read obsessively about the latest developments, and they may have more insight and understanding.
Right,
they may also
more
be
passionate to them.
They can also psych themselves out and go off the rabbit hole and like have a conspiracy theory about it too. Sure. So, right, so there's both sides of it, but only by increasing the transparency in documenting this, and that's really what's missing, is having better blood tests and better markers that we're going to help people get access to, so they can actually see what they're doing instead of just a placebo effect. And I felt like this that day. It could have been completely in your head. And then of course the whole biohacking, gene editing and stuff is freaking people out.
They think we're gonna make some like crazy monster or something. Yeah,
this has been a classic thing. I've been dealing with this for years. When we first started, we had to go in for these FBI meetings once a year. They'd bring us to DC. They brought me and all the other biohacker kind of community labs. There are only a few in the country, in different cities.
So you classify as one of them now.
Well, they were trying to do outreach with us to kind of understand biosecurity threats and what is it going to be like when this stuff is in everybody's basement or your bathroom, and you can be brewing up, doing this stuff at home.
Can you make a monster?
It's a legitimate concern, but
really far away.
What I've said is mainly it's all government labs and universities that have been the ones that have always been irresponsible and have weaponized things in the past. So having public labs where people can go and access this is much safer. Because otherwise you are going to get people doing it at their house somewhere secretly.
But do you think somebody should be administering what kind of developments are happening? I mean, isn't that partly what you would expect for some sort of institution that is overseeing and has oversight?
This has come up many times. I would say like there's no way to legislate this and to try to...
I mean, that's what I think Elon Musk was trying to do with the whole AI stuff. He's trying to embed himself in the different companies that are at the cutting frontier.
Right? It's too late. You have to align people's incentives, right? Because we are biology. You're not going to be able to like legislate somebody's genome or genomic thing. It's ridiculous. Like these different strains of things they're exchanged every day in the mail.
Well, I mean, even in the sense of like weaponizing, like you'd want to have some way of preventing that. Obviously, you're like from what you said, maybe that's already been, it's already out there.
The answer is like eventually, some bad actor will try to weaponize something, and unfortunately, our system is not very prepared. We're going to need to overhaul our entire like infrastructure for how we do public health. You're going to need smart vaccines that can be uploaded. Like in the future, the scenario would be that we have embedded DNA sequencers and sensors all over the environment. Our sewage system, airports, everywhere would have these small chips that can sample the air.
Hold on, can you explain what a DNA sequencer does, first of all, so we understand what it is that you're trying to explain?
All right, so basically, we can detect different diseases and pathogens through a bunch of variety of techniques of molecular biology probes, right? So in the 1980s, the main one that was developed was called PCR, polymerase chain reaction.
Okay.
And it's actually won the Nobel Prize. He went to high school with my parents back in South Carolina.
PCR?
Yeah, so PCR was really a fundamental development, and if you remember the O.J. Simpson trial, it was one of the
Right.
first times people were exposed to this. It's how they did the DNA evidence.
So it's a chain reaction is a method of widely used molecular biology to make many copies of specific DNA segments.
Right. But so basically, it's like a needle in the haystack. But if you know what the description of the needle is, you can
find it much
magnify
easier.
and you just make a bunch of needles, right? So that's how I would explain it. So we know most of the sequences for different things like avian flu, influenza, Ebola virus, all of this stuff becomes documented and published. So we know what the different letters of the DNA are. They're code for that. Now, in the future, one of the dangers is we could synthesize that too. You could synthesize whatever pathogen. We could even make up new pathogens that had never existed in nature yet. But some bad actor could do that, print it out. You could model it on the computer and synthesize a new form of virus that no one had been immune to.
So
there's
then
no
everybody's
immunity.
screwed.
Right. But what we're imagining in the future is we'd have this like surveillance system, global pandemic surveillance, and you'd have different sensors on a chip, and you could be mounted in different strategic places like bus stops, airports, anywhere that is a pathogen hub where people are spreading.
So you could
lots of disease.
detect it essentially. What kind of
Right, and you have
pathogens
the
are
idea of the Internet of Things, right? So you
Right,
have the Internet of
IoT.
Things with these sensors in the environment, and they're streaming, and then our algorithms hopefully alert you, and then somebody, either the CDC or probably you'd have a network of these white hat hackers that are like the good guys,
right?
and they're ready. It all depends on open information exchange. So if governments and everybody's being secretive about this, actually handicaps
You're
your
screwed.
ability to react. And right now we have sort of an arms race with China going on around DNA sequencing, because China is like going 100% on this. They're sequencing all their population.
This is like the moon race for DNA sequencing.
In a way, it is. But I encourage people.
I'm Canadian
not,
today too,
right,
by the way.
I've
I've been listening to too much Peterson.
Right, but the wrong model would be the Cold War USSR, nuclear arms race.
Right.
We have to have an open
extreme.
exchange of information, right? And then what happens if something happens? You can go and download a smart vaccine, because we would cook up the antibodies. We could predict, the thing, and then you just upgrade your immune system with that.
That's
patch,
crazy. You're just
right?
like update.
Yes, so that's kind of like, this is the far out, 30 year, 40 year, 50 year
I love it.
sort of thing. But
It's funny, man. I know that tech and all this stuff, it's going to be there before we know it. So it's just a matter of time.
yeah, basically we're learning, we've already learned to read DNA cheaply. We're going to be able to write DNA inexpensively. That's the next step for synthetic biology, synthesizing stuff. And then we're going to need to be able to boot it up and put it into our bodies, figure out how to safely,
Without having it go crazy.
contain it. Yeah, you're going to want to augment different parts of your biology. But
Seems
it's
like
not,
the third piece is the most difficult.
it's not just biology. I tell people we're already using contact lens and all kinds of augmentation. So it's both mechanical interfaces are going to be just as dramatic as biological upgrades. You may have people choosing to amputate their arm or leg because it's better to have a robotic implant now. It's a superior technology.
I was talking to you about
Right.
this the other day. I was asking you, what would you think
Yeah.
about having the same sort of brain, but then having a full Terminator style
Yeah, I
body, but then
think,
your brain would kind of be
there's different cyborg scenarios, right?
Right.
Where basically you could replace most things, but your internal organs, you'd probably need the chest, your major organs here in the chest cavity, and the brain. You could replace all your limbs like now. I mean, I know there's he's an interesting guy on Instagram who's like a birth quadriplegia. He has no arms and legs, only one part of one arm. And he's like a fitness Instagram guy because he competed in physique. So that's interesting. He's a motivational speaker now too.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, Nick or whatever.
Nick Vujicic? no?
Santos or something like that.
That's
Yeah.
another guy.
So,
Okay.
and then there's all these people with limbs blown off from war injuries and stuff. So I think we're pretty close to having like an exoskeleton where you could put your torso in and start manipulating the limbs.
That's so cool.
Dr. Octopus style,
Oh, yeah.
we have extra limbs. I would want to do that because then you have a pair of hands doing other stuff.
I was
while
talking
you're
about
playing
it's like part
piano,
of his
typing
spinal
over here,
cord.
and you got your food over here, have it made right. So that's definitely coming. So people usually get hung up on biology, and I can remind them look, biology is just one type of technology we're going to be using. We're probably going to be doing more in extreme augmentations through merging with mechanical systems than biology. It's going to be a combination of those things. Because there are only so many things you can do with biology, and it doesn't make sense. It makes more sense to use a mechanical prosthesis and graft it on. And it's all about how we interface with the technology. But yeah, I mean, there's risks to all of this, of course, but I don't think no one is going to remain unenhanced. We're already
at some point.
We're already doing enhancement. You're already using caffeine, coffee. Like, people are just hypocrites about what they think is an acceptable enhancement or not. They're it's like a pure
what I'm doing is okay. What you're doing is not okay.
What I'm doing is natural, but your thing is weird. It's like, no, man, you've been using technology since you were a caveman and started to pick up a rock. That was the first time people cheated and were no longer natural or whatever. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right.
How far do you want to go?
So, but yeah, and then some people want to go all the way to post-human, basically meld with machines, become like a machine. And I don't know. I haven't made my mind up on this stuff. It's hard to know.
I mean, all of this speculative. We don't know anything for sure. Tomorrow an asteroid comes, we're all fucked,
this is why. But I mean, I'd say, like, you do have to prioritize. We need to focus on aging because that's urgent, and then that gives you more time.
Yeah.
So you can slow down and figure out these other things. You don't have to rush.
Yeah. Do you think once you started focusing on the sort of, longevity started piece, did it make it more chaotic inside of your head, realizing that you have such a limited, finite amount of time here?
Yeah, I mean, I came to awareness of that at a pretty young age. I had a awareness of death and mortality when I was like 8 or 9 or something, thinking about this and looking at my pets and stuff too, because they age at a faster rate than humans. So
you definitely had a higher level of consciousness as a kid.
Yeah, I mean,
is that due to your dad? Maybe
it's combinations of different things, upbringing and intelligence and stuff too correlates with that. And then just my mother mainly took the role in she would read to me from a really early age, like age 2 and 3, and read to me all the way up through into middle school, or she would always read to me, like a great book. So that's probably one of the biggest.
Do you like to read yourself?
Things. Yeah, I read constantly, just
That's
massive
awesome,
amounts.
Can you believe it or not? I hated reading, but I've recently started really enjoying it. I can't do too much because I don't have the attention span to sit there for hours and hours, but like I definitely try to read 5 to 10 to 15 minutes in the morning and like maybe 10, 15 minutes before I go to bed. And
well, now people are consuming this type of podcast media and audio.
Oh, and I listen to audiobooks whenever I'm driving.
Yeah, audio is good. You can do it at 1.5 speed or whatever.
That's right.
Although I read really fast, so I can sometimes read a transcript.
How do you get better at, how do you get so fast at reading? Do you think it's like a practice
started
thing?
Early and read massively all for years, but you can do techniques. I never did a speed reading.
Yeah, I thought about doing a course, but I was like,
I think it really was just like a muscle, like everything else you use.
I definitely notice I'm getting a little faster though as I read more. I've been noticing like where you look on the line
you
can help, so you can periphery read a little bit. So notice some weird shit like that. That's kind of cool. But
well, yeah, it's like anything else. You got to use it or you lose that. The brain only does which pathways you train and reinforce.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for me. I'm like worthless at certain things. I get lost. I have bad spatial navigation, and it's probably I don't pay attention. It's like I have selective attention deficit for those things. You can drive around, you just didn't pay attention, and you're off on something. And now we use this friggin' navigation thing for everything on the phone.
Oh yeah.
So you're completely reliant on it, and you atrophied all of that.
I mean, I think it was one of the philosophers, part of probably one of Peterson's lectures was like, the moment that we decided to start writing things down, we gave up the ability to remember.
Recitation, you used to be able to recite long lists of people's
why do
family.
people remember stories? Why do people remember poems? Is because they're trying to pass information down. That was just the medium then,
Yeah, and I used to have to memorize some of that in school. They would have us memorize passages from Shakespeare.
Even when I was growing up, they did that a little bit.
I had a few for years. I had the thing from Macbeth in my head. It was like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesteryears have something, whatever, out, brief candle, and then I've lost it. And then it's like full of sound of fury signifying nothing. So I've got like 60% of that soliloquy still in my head from high school. Cool. That was from age 16 or some crap, right?
Yeah.
36, 20 years later, I have part of it, but that it's buried somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Useless. right?
Have you found certain like tools or certain things useful that like you recommend people to do to like kind of sharpen up their knife of their
Yes,
intellect?
like weird and lazy in some ways about
I
this.
really find that hard to believe.
Well, so I'm weird about things. I'm the opposite of like these Tim Ferriss types. They like to do all these productivity suite hacks, and
Yeah.
I like very impatient with those kinds of things. I
Like how
hate
so? Because I'm pretty impatient myself. So
I
tell me.
hate like
Let's bond.
I hate systems and habits. Like, don't give me another
Framework.
tool. I don't want another piece of software that I have to keep a friggin' email. I'm very lazy about certain things. Like, they say that stupid cliche about the CEO will just wear the same pair of pants every day of the week or whatever, so you don't spend any mental energy on
I think
that.
that's stupid.
Well, I'm kind of like this with my sweatpants. I'll just wear these like workout clothes most days of the week. I have the same outfit. I'm going to switch it out. So I just have to spend no mental energy on that. I'll do the same thing for eating. I would just eat the same chicken breast or shake or whatever.
That's because you're a bodybuilder.
Well, right. I know, but it's also my personality type because I'm using this brain power on these weird ideas. Like a lot of the time,
Fair enough.
I don't have much left over for planning what I'm going to wear or what I'm going to eat that day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I stay
outside of
away
all this
from-
shit, do you not like sit down to watch Netflix? Like, do you not?
Yeah, I
like,
watch a bunch of crap. Like,
Yeah.
I waste
What do you
a
look
ton
like?
of
What do you like
time.
to watch when you
Just
like just brain numbing
All
yourself?
sci-fi mostly.
Come on,
Yeah,
man.
of
You're like,
course.
I gotta stay related to the field.
Well, yeah, I mean, I binge the usual crap, Westworld or Game of Thrones, I guess. The
Are you
standard
excited for
usual
Game of
stuff.
Thrones?
I'm kind of over it at this point.
You already
man.
know
They
what's gonna
took too
happen,
long.
right?
Well, it's all messed up because the author George Martin didn't finish writing the books.
know.
They overtook the storyline and the things. It's kind of like, forget it. I'm ready for it to be over.
Yeah.
But then they're gonna do these dumb spinoffs. It's just terrible,
We'll see how it
right?
goes.
They're gonna ruin it. It's just gonna get greedy.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I don't do any weird productivity rituals. I know there's a bunch of people that swear by these things.
It's just about like you said earlier, man. It's just about what can you find that works for you. And I found this more and more listening to Peterson. It's like you have to negotiate with yourself because you're a terrible person to manage yourself.
Yeah.
You set these insane expectations on yourself. Like I did it myself, like Brad was here the other day and we did like a podcast and I'm like, okay, I got to edit like 15 different videos so I can have all this content. I'm like, dude, it took me 3 hours to make 3 videos.
Never get it done. And it'll be exponential adding on. So I would just, and I'm bad at a bunch of those things. It's like, there's a bunch of stuff I'm not suited for. I'm not detail oriented in this. So I have like many things that I just cannot do. I'm not suited for. And that's the problem. It's like ideally you want to have a team, some kind of thing where you can delegate and have these things structured, but you need money to do that. And you're bootstrapping, you're screwed. And that's why most of these ventures, things can never get off the ground. It's like, it's rare that you have like a combination of talents and then also embedded in some sort of organization that can leverage that.
Right.
And I've been on my own for years doing this as a sole founder or entrepreneur and bootstrapping these things.
What has that been like? I'm curious. Like the whole
kind
entrepreneur
of miserable.
experience.
Honestly, it's like this masochistic thing.
It is. Well,
Right?
I mean, kind of the bodybuilding nature is masochistic, right? It's like,
a
hey, I'm
way
going to
it is.
inflict this much pain on myself. I'm sore. I don't give a
It's
shit. I'm going to
similar.
keep working out, overtraining, and just, then people go crazy with masochistic with the drugs too in
Sure.
bodybuilding.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem is like I'm able to start certain things and get them to a certain threshold, but then it's like scaling is a different skill set.
Yeah.
It's not really my skill set.
Yeah. I mean, you could definitely bring somebody in.
And I don't, I'm not really, I don't like managing stuff. I have to oversee some large, boring structure. But, I mean, you just like, that's the beauty of these tools in a way. These kinds of connected tools are letting us outsource from our weaknesses and try to use that technology to make up for what we're not temperamentally suited to do. But again, and I don't know, I kind of think you should just play to your strengths. It's not worth trying
What have
to
you found to be your
train your
strengths?
weaknesses. I mean,
I agree with you, by the way. I think you should
that's it.
maximize your strengths and not focus too much on what you're not good
I'm
at.
an ideas person. I'm very good at making connections, getting people to do stuff they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm able to like induce them, to
Influence.
try to get, I've spent a lot of time trying to advocate for open science. We ran 3 of these conferences. They were fairly successful, I guess, but I'll take on these gigantic things like the biomedical establishment or these things. There's just, and I finally realized, okay, well, I was delusional. I didn't know any better. I was like, I come into it thinking I'm going to change the world. Okay, good luck with that. And I've met, other versions of myself coming up behind me, younger. I was like, okay, well, yeah, they just
You're looking at one right across the
had
table.
no idea how monumental that is. And then you have to like step back from that and realize, okay, because otherwise you just destroy yourself
Yeah.
crashing up against it. Right. And then, yeah, I've learned to just like try to back away from stuff.
How do
be
you stay
lazy.
like level headed? Because I'm sure, I mean, do you just keep yourself too busy to have time to think like outside of, I mean, well, let me ask it a different way.
Yeah, I obsess on lots of stuff.
But you must have bad days. You must have like your down moments. How do you pick yourself back up?
I mean, I have a lot of cynicism and like anger and negative emotion.
That's where the gym comes in.
Get stuck in, and I have to be able to train it out. And then a lot of times I'm ranting on Facebook like a maniac, kind of like Trump.
It's therapy.
Yeah, I rant out all this like stuff. It's fun for me. People don't really always, they're not going to get it.
Well, it's one of those things that you're doing it. That's the
for
weird
me.
thing with
it's
social.
For me, it's like
I
I'm
agree.
journaling it. I'm practically journaling it,
Sure.
and then the people can tune in if they want to see.
I mean, that's essentially what this is.
The unfiltered madness.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to do a long format discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to deal with I've had a lot of problems with my negativity coming out of interpersonal relationships where I rant about stuff a lot. That's just always been my style. And I'm growing up and I'm argumentative and very interface. But then sometimes certain people or relationships, so they cannot interface with that. They feel that it's hostile towards them or whatever. And I've in the past, I've like made that mistake where I'm criticizing different things and done it as a personal attack when it shouldn't have been. Like I would rant about people's career goals or say, oh, that's stupid or to do that, or housing, like getting a mortgage.
I think you're just opinionated and that just doesn't sit well with
I've
people.
realized I have this negativity. You know what? It's I grew up around a lot of this from my dad because he does that too. And so it's genetic and it's a learned thing. So I've had to
I have similar stuff in mind.
Find my communication style and learned that like, okay, stop. Don't even do that. There's no point in criticizing, right? It doesn't do anything. I will like rant about why it's dumb to buy a house, like to be a scam, basically to get a mortgage on a house, because it's this part of this debt slavery thing. And then I finally realized, and I was dating this girl at the time who was, it's like, okay, well, her goal is to like own her own home, right? It's not going to, it fucking doesn't help for me to she's not going to get that I'm like critiquing capitalism and saying that that's a
I think people take you too literally rather than the broader sort of point that you're trying to make and like where is it coming from,
Well, no, and then I have been on the other side where I've debated with other technologists and people in Silicon Valley and stuff, and I've realized, hey, they're just like have this nasty aggressive argumentation style, and then it can get off on this thing where it's just it doesn't help, because then it does become where it's like they're attacking you.
Right.
Whether they mean to or not. And it's like, did I sound like that? That was how I was doing all these times to these people growing up. And I'm like, I got to recognize that. And, because you're not going to influence people that way. And most of the things we're talking about are so controversial. People have what's apparently has been called like this guy in the 70s, future shock. Alvin Toffler wrote a thing.
Future shock.
It was one of these classic prediction futurist books. There's a bunch of futurists out there.
You like Kurzweil?
He was one of the
Kurzweil.
Yeah, I know Kurzweil. Yeah. I have some opinions about him. I've known of him for years. I've been in a bunch of stuff with him for many years. And I think he's okay. So a lot of the people around him have appropriated his stuff and turned it into almost a cult. It's like Scientology for tech people, practically. That's how I would call it now.
Interesting.
But then the idea is you can only introduce someone to like an idea that's one step beyond their comfort level and familiarity. It's like, now
because then they can't connect to it.
People didn't know what a smartphone was, but they knew what a telephone was.
Right.
You start talking about machine interface uploads and telephone.
Well, yeah, I mean, take your cell phone, walk back to 20 years ago and show it to somebody. They'd be like, the hell?
This is why when I would go out and evangelize, I've kind of stopped evangelizing for life extension and longevity. I'm like, fuck it, it doesn't matter. Either you're gonna be dead because you didn't embrace life extension, or in 100 years, everyone around will have adopted life extension because they're the only ones that survive. Natural selection will take course. No, I'm saying we do need to persuade people to some extent to support this, because every extent that they're slowing it down is killing another 150,000 people a day, right? But I finally realized that going out and like preaching at them is not having any effect. The same as the Mormons showing up on your door and
Fair
Let me
enough.
tell you about the Lord. You know, I mean, it's not going to work, right? You have to engage people in almost a seduction way. It really is flirtation,
Yeah.
seduction, not this in your face thing. Or they're just going to shut you down.
Yeah, there's
Right.
definitely an art to presentation, and there's an art to like
Right.
displaying an idea, I mean, there's certain people that do that really well, So
And I mean, Aubrey de Grey has been the main like global ambassador around longevity
oh, okay.
stuff.
Well,
So
look this
he's
guy
kind
up.
of the
Oh, yeah.
world's most prolific speaker. I've known him for many years back before he really took off. He has this crazy beard. It's very unforgettable.
Oh
Yeah,
Lord, look at this guy.
So Aubrey has done this for almost 20 years now, and he's basically moved it.
Did you meet him in London?
Yeah, when I was over there, I went out to Cambridge. He used to be living in Cambridge University.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we've known
2000s, right around the same time.
We've known each other pretty well. He's one of like 12 people I had to my 30th birthday party. So I didn't have
Oh
that
my
many people
goodness.
come to my 30th. But I'm going to have him on the podcast probably to do on the Life Extension episode. We may have him down for one of the meetups at the longevity meetup.
Wow, that'd be great.
Anyway, I've known him pretty well. But he actually took this crazy idea from being completely dismissed in about 2004. When
Which
I first
was?
got to know him, the idea that we could actually do human life extension and make it a legitimate thing for bio people to work on, because it was looked at as a complete, you're a lunatic freak if you dare to work on this or talk about it. And in about 13 years time or whatever, he moved it from where, and it got mainstream, not quite totally mainstream, but real serious people. Jeff Bezos investing in a company that's a life extension company for Senolytics. It's called Unity Biotech. The Google founders, a bunch of the big money people in Silicon Valley have made significant real investments.
So you think this is a good change in the direction then?
I mean, it's a first change that we needed. It's certainly not complete, but it's like we went from nothing, from complete, you'd be laughed at. It's
getting the right eyes now.
You're getting laughed at, to now it's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because those are some big names, right? To catch attention.
It is,
if
and
Amazon and
right, and I ultimately
Google are
I
looking
don't
into it.
think they're sufficient to be the patrons for this. It's not going to work when it's just a few billionaire people supporting that.
Right.
We have to have a full, legitimate industry of longevity stuff that has to be built out, and it's been snake oil scam people for decades. That's what the problem is. You always attract this weird fringe element
right
to these types of ideas. And so you have this division of labor. You have the evangelical side, and those people are great hearts, but they're incompetent typically. Then later, probably 15 years later or more, the competent people show up who are actually going to reduce it to practice and do the work of commercializing and disseminating the real on-the-ground innovations that consumers will interface with, just like computers the same way. You had early people that preached about personal computers and were like here spreading the ideology, but they never actually built the stuff that became you had the early innovators like Gateway Computer. I don't remember any of this stuff. Michael Dell, they actually packaged up the personal computer and made it in a way where you could get it in the hands of consumers. And that happens in it's dissemination of all these things. And for anti-aging, we're still like maybe the first wave of therapy companies coming online in the 2020s.
Okay.
Where they're going to give the first rounds of treatments to people in their 40s and 50s.
I have a question. Have you ever considered this? My girlfriend's Asian. Have you ever considered how well Asian people age compared to others?
Yeah, there have been studies on this.
What is your take on it?
Like, I mean, the longest lived populations in certain regions of Okinawa in Japan.
Right. I've heard that.
It's both the diet effect.
They're also the most depressed people there, right?
Well, no, that's more like Finland and stuff with no sunlight, like per day.
Oh, because even the biological factors of it, yeah.
But it's partly diet. So yeah, I mean, Asians definitely, their skin especially seems to be much younger.
Yeah.
And more resilient. But they also avoid the sun like the plague too. That's the whole thing. So they're avoiding that, and that's not having that UV exposure, right? Which ages you more. I do this tanning booth, which is terrible.
I used to do the tanning booth,
right?
And when I was competing, man.
And I was using this melanotan too, the peptide that gives you the
sunless
tanning.
The melanin that changes your...
I like that a lot.
That's easier.
It gets you super dark like in a short amount of time. But I think it messes up your pigment stem cells, so you kind of exhaust them faster because you're turning them over faster. So I use it maybe a few times a year, but not like prolonged all year long. So yeah, no, there's definitely some unbelievable like 40-year-olds on social media, Asian women that look like they're 20.
So I wonder if there's like something that's in their DNA or something that we can
Yeah, I mean,
understand if there's contributions
well,
to
even
that.
individuals are varying. We have an aging clock, like our biological age is not our chronological age. And there's some new biomarker tests you can take now. It's a panel that'll show you, based on all these like 500 markers, what they think as a composite your quote biological age is compared to what your birthday age is.
Right. And I also feel that, so I went from, being very, very active, being a bodybuilder to then once I moved to Silicon Valley to try to work in tech, I became less active,
Right.
just being the nature of being in a workplace and you're just exhausted by the end of the day and you're just like, and then more and more I started to stay indoors and be less and less active. So I kind of went to the polar opposite of being, from a bodybuilder.
Yep.
And I noticed that my body itself and the way I felt and carried myself and my emotions and everything definitely changed. I felt like I was getting it like more rigid and older.
Right.
Joints were not feeling the best, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like the moment I started shifting, my lifestyle changes, started moving, towards a better direction.
Yeah. No, I agree.
noticed all this shit, like, and my body was starting to feel better. It felt like it just cooperated. It's almost like I've made my body younger.
Oops.
All
Do
good.
that for a second. I'll call them back.
All good. We'll probably about to get to wrap this up in a little bit. It's been 2.5 hours. Can
I
you
know,
believe
right?
that?
I know it goes. You're gonna get wound up.
Can't even believe that. This is the longest one I've done.
I don't know who will make it through?
Yeah, this has been good. But just to wrap it up, like I felt that there's a tremendous amount that you get from working out as a benefit to your
definitely.
aging. So I think that's.
Yeah, just staying movement is really important for everything. All the studies have shown that. And, I mean, there's an argument to be made. We should be giving people some kind of subsidy to be able to work out, because it's going to save so much in healthcare spending.
Correct. I agree with it.
Or it should be carved out of the work day somehow. But of course, any attempts to push those policies usually end up getting manipulated or abused.
Right.
But, there's a lot we could do to re-engineer our lifestyles.
I'm a strong believer from my experience there is just that like your mental health is very much related to physical activity. If you're not doing any amount of physical activity and you're in shitty mental health, that would be a really easy way to try. Just take yourself out for a 15-minute walk.
Yeah.
Change your scene.
It's very hard when you're in a rut like that.
Yeah.
People can't break the
Oh
cycle.
Yeah, I know. And you're just caught up in that
move.
loop. And that's what happened to me is I would just get real caught up in that loop and you don't want to do anything. I still don't know how to break out of that, to be honest with you, because I remember even thinking to myself, like, who the hell am I? I don't even recognize this person. Why am I so...
Well, I've had multiple periods like that over the years. I had these several big prolonged crashes. And at one point, I even went and did this experimental transcranial magnetic stimulation, signed up for a research study. And basically, they're doing magnetic stimulation to the part of the brain to try to alleviate depression. And eventually there'll be home devices like that. There are some now on the market you can get for direct electrical current stimulation.
Did you feel it worked?
It's hard to know because I did 2 batches of it. One of them was a placebo part of the trial, and then the other you're guaranteed to be in the active thing. But it could also be that just committing to do the trial and taking the 8 weeks. Of this
I think
thing,
also like
you're gonna be pushing stuff out because like I'm making myself show up 5 days, this many days a week to come down.
A lot
of
I think getting out of depression is committing to yourself and building up a pattern, a routine of some sort. Is like you because you essentially what it is you're not able to find any meaning in anything, right? You've become completely
I've been
like
injured. When I got injured like this, I can't train, and I know and I had my surgery repair last year, but I'd planned for that. It's like when we're not going to fall in a rut, we got to make sure I go sign up and do legs with this trainer this month, make sure I'm doing, so I have someone to make me train again. And then I was able to kind of steer out of that, which otherwise could have become a bad, a prolonged down episode. But no, I mean, are good drugs, certain antidepressants. I mentioned Deprenyl is one, looking into Selegiline, which is a Parkinson's drug. Very good for dopamine and just as an anti-aging drug. And I find that it helps to stay at a baseline. Take it just once a week or twice a week. Makes you a little more resilient and you're just more resilient to all types of stress.
And I think testosterone plays a role in that. And I think a lot of young men today have low testosterone, which is crazy.
From environmental estrogens and things like that.
Yeah, and the poor diet increases your, estrogen
Yeah.
metabolizing more and more. It's just, I mean, I know for sure I went through some phases of that too, and definitely doing much better than before. So like,
Yeah, you're telling me that.
it's
You got to stay
crazy,
on top of
man.
it.
I know. So I think for me, what I found works is like, you definitely have to do things to keep your mind in a good, healthy state, which involves some form of physical activity. It definitely involves stimulus, like giving yourself positive information, like good reading material, or like listening to shit that like is going to give you good stimulus rather than just the normal like social media manufactured. Everybody's life is so great. Like you got to set aside time for that. I think those are two definitely very important things. But shoot, Joe,
All right. Yeah.
it's
we
been
gotta
quite a
wrap it up.
bit.
Yeah,
Let's
we went
let's
long
wrap
there.
this one up. I'm so happy you did it. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for being
thanks
here,
for having
man.
me on.
I'm gonna cut this out
right.
on the intro here, and we'll stop the
sweet.
stream, and we'll get on with it.
All right. I'm gonna hit the road in a minute. See you. I don't know who's just calling me at this time.
So cool, man. I think we are now offline finally. Wow, I can't believe we just did it for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I know it can get going.
That was
You
awesome.
never know.
Wow, that was great.
I'm trying to